When a global superstar humiliates a janitor, live, she never expected him to destroy her empire in 60 seconds. Inside Nashville's Ryman Auditorium, country superstar Harper Weston dragged a quiet janitor named Evan Brooks onto the stage in front of 500 guests and millions watching worldwide. With cameras rolling and rubber gloves still on his hands, she handed him a microphone and demanded he hit an impossible note, just to watch him fail. "Fail quietly," she hissed. But Harper didn't know Evan's secret. She didn't know what he'd sacrificed, and she definitely didn't know he was about to expose the lie that built her entire career. If you want to see how one father's voice brought down a music industry titan, stay until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The champagne flutes caught the stage lights like tiny stars scattered across white tablecloths. Evan Brooks pushed his utility cart past the VIP section of the Ryman Auditorium, careful not to let the wheels squeak on the polished hardwood. Around him, Nashville's elite settled into their seats, men in tailored tuxedos, women in gowns that cost more than his annual salary. The charity gala was already 90 minutes behind schedule, but nobody seemed to mind. They were here for Harper Weston, and Harper Weston was worth waiting for. Evan kept his head down, emptying champagne bottles from the overflow bins near the stage entrance. 5 years of working these events had taught him the fundamental rule of invisibility: move efficiently, speak only when spoken to, and never make eye contact with anyone wearing jewelry worth more than your car. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to check it to know who was calling. Mia's nurse always called at 8:15 right after evening medications. Evan would call back during his break, same as every night, and listen to his 9-year-old daughter's breathless update about whatever cartoon she'd watched or book she'd finished. Those 15-minute calls were the only thing that made these late shifts bearable. "Excuse me." A woman in a black headset materialized beside his cart. "You need to clear this area. Ms. Weston goes on in 5 minutes." "Yes, ma'am. Almost done." Evan grabbed the last 3 bottles and headed for the service corridor. Behind him, the house lights dimmed. The crowd's murmur shifted into anticipatory silence. Then a single spotlight blazed to life, illuminating an empty microphone stand at center stage. The applause started before Harper even appeared, a trained response from an audience that knew their role. When she finally emerged from the wings, the sound became deafening. Harper Weston moved like someone who'd been famous so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to walk unnoticed. Her silver gown caught every photon in the building. Her blonde hair fell in waves that probably required 3 people in 4 hours to achieve. She smiled with the kind of confidence that came from seeing your face on magazine covers and every grocery store checkout line in America. "Nashville!" Her voice filled the auditorium without effort. "Are you ready to change some lives tonight?" The crowd roared. Evan paused at the service corridor entrance, one hand on the door. He'd worked enough of these events to know the rhythm. Harper would do 3 songs, make a tearful speech about the children, and pass around donation tablets while showing photos of sick kids on the massive screens flanking the stage. By midnight, the charity would announce they'd raised $2 million. By morning, Harper's publicist would issue a press release praising Nashville's generosity, and by next month, maybe 5% of that money would actually reach any hospitals. Evan knew this because he'd researched every charity Harper attached her name to. He'd spent hours on his phone after Mia fell asleep, cross-referencing tax documents and financial disclosures, trying to understand how someone could raise tens of millions of dollars for sick children while so many families like his, still couldn't afford the care their kids desperately needed. The answer was always the same: administrative costs, processing fees, operational expenses. The money disappeared into a machine that fed everyone except the people it was supposedly designed to help. "This first song," Harper was saying, "goes out to every parent who's ever sat in a hospital room and prayed for a miracle." Evan's hand tightened on the door handle. 3 months ago, Mia's cardiologist had used words like deteriorating and urgent intervention and limited window. The surgery she needed cost $847,000. Their insurance would cover less than half. Evan's savings, everything he'd accumulated from his previous life, had been exhausted years ago on Mia's earlier treatments and Sarah's cancer care. He should leave. He should push through the service corridor and get back to work. But something made him stay. watching through the narrow gap as Harper positioned herself at the microphone. The opening notes filled the auditorium, a piano melody that built slowly, deliberately, toward the moment everyone was waiting for. Harper's voice started soft, almost vulnerable, telling a story about loss and hope and the unbreakable bond between parent and child. The audience leaned forward. Phone cameras rose like a field of glowing flowers. Evan had heard this song before. Everyone had. Hold On had spent 14 weeks at #1. The music video had 500 million views. And the climax, the moment that had made Harper Weston a household name, was the high note in the bridge, a sustained E6 that supposedly demonstrated both technical mastery and raw emotional power. The song built toward that moment now. Harper's voice climbed the scale, the band swelling behind her, the spotlight narrowing until she was the only thing visible in the entire building. Her head tilted back, her hand pressed against her heart. The note was coming, and Evan heard the click. It was subtle, barely perceptible under the orchestration and the ambient noise of 500 people holding their breath. But Evan's ears were trained from years in recording studios. He knew the sound of a backing track engaging. He knew the frequency shift that happened when a live vocal got reinforced by a pre-recorded layer. Harper hit the note. It soared above the band, pure and powerful and absolutely perfect. The crowd erupted. People were crying. Someone in the front row was on their feet. But Evan had heard the truth in that fraction of a second before Harper opened her mouth. The note wasn't entirely hers. Maybe not hers at all. He let the service door close and stood in the fluorescent-lit corridor, his heart hammering. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. This was Harper Weston. You didn't build a career spanning 15 years and 7 Grammy Awards on a lie that obvious. Except the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. Harper's speaking voice sat comfortably in the alto range. Her chest voice was strong but not exceptional, and that signature note, the one that had launched her into superstardom, was nearly 2 full octaves above where she spent most of her vocal performance. Evan pulled out his phone and opened the browser. His fingers moved automatically, searching for live performances of Hold On. There were hundreds. Late-night shows, award ceremonies, special events. He clicked on the most recent, recorded just 6 weeks ago in Los Angeles. Harper performed with her usual polish. The note approached. She tilted her head back. And there. Evan watched it 3 times to be sure. There was no visible breath support. Her abdomen didn't engage. Her throat didn't show the tension required for that kind of power. She looked like someone lip-syncing to their own recording. He clicked another video. Same thing. Then another and another. His phone buzzed, the nurse calling back. Evan answered without taking his eyes off the screen. "Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry to bother you at work." "It's fine, Carol. How is she?" "That's why I'm calling. Dr. Reeves stopped by during evening rounds. He wants to move the surgery up. Mia's echo this morning showed increased regurgitation. He thinks we should schedule for next month instead of waiting until spring." The phone suddenly felt very heavy in Evan's hand. "Next month, that's... I know it's fast, but he's concerned about waiting longer. Her heart is working too hard, and we don't want to risk..." Carol's voice caught. "We don't want to risk permanent damage." Through the service corridor door, Evan could hear Harper launching into her second song. Upbeat this time. Empowering. Something about being unbreakable. "How much time do I have?" Evan asked. "To get the money together?" "Dr. Reeves can hold the surgical slot for 2 weeks. After that, we'll have to reschedule, and honestly, Mr. Brooks, I don't know when we'd get another opening. Pediatric cardiology is booked months out. 2 weeks. I'm so sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." Evan thanked her and ended the call. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the white cinder block wall. 2 weeks to find $400,000. It might as well have been $4 million. He'd already borrowed from everyone he knew. He'd sold everything worth selling. He worked 70 hours a week between the janitorial company and the night shifts at the warehouse. There was no more blood in the stone. He looked down at his phone, still showing Harper's Los Angeles performance frozen on the screen, her head thrown back in artificial ecstasy, her mouth open on a note she might not be actually singing. And suddenly, a dark thought crystallized in his mind. Harper would raise $2 million tonight. $2 million supposedly for sick children. Children like Mia. And most of it would vanish into administrative costs, while Harper's team posted photos on social media and collected awards for philanthropy. Evan had walked away from the music industry 5 years ago for Mia. He'd abandoned a rising career, walked out on a recording contract, turned his back on everything he'd worked for since he was 16 years old. He'd made that choice without hesitation because Sarah was dying and Mia needed her father, and some things mattered more than fame. But watching Harper weaponize sick children for publicity while potentially building her entire career on a manufactured talent, that was different. That was something he couldn't walk away from. The second song ended. Applause thundered through the walls. Evan pushed back through the service door and moved along the back wall of the auditorium, positioning himself where he could see both the stage and the sound booth. Harper was talking now, her voice dropping into that intimate register that made audiences feel like she was speaking directly to them. I know why you're all here tonight. You're here because you believe, like I believe, that every child deserves a chance. Every child deserves the best medical care, regardless of what their parents can afford. And that's why I'm so proud to partner with the Children's Hope Foundation. Evan pulled up the foundation's latest tax filing on his phone. Total revenue last year, $18.3 million. Amount distributed to hospitals and families, $2.1 million. Executive salaries, $3.2 million. Processing fees, $4.7 million. Marketing and awareness, $5.8 million. And tonight, Harper continued, we're going to do something special. Every face you see on these screens is a child waiting for help, waiting for hope, and we're going to give it to them. The massive LED screens flickered to life. Children's faces appeared, dozens of them, cycling through every few seconds. Evan's breath caught. Third row, second from the left. Mia, her photo from last year's hospital admission, the one where she'd insisted on wearing her rainbow shirt even though it was too big, the one where she'd smiled for the camera despite the oxygen cannula and the IV port, and the fear in her eyes that she'd tried so hard to hide from him. Harper hadn't asked permission to use that photo. Nobody from the Children's Hope Foundation had ever contacted him. They'd pulled it from the hospital's publicity database, the one he'd agreed to when Mia was first admitted, back when he still believed that raising awareness actually helped people. Each of these children, Harper said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion, represents a family in crisis, a parent lying awake at night, wondering how they'll pay for treatment, a child who just wants to live long enough to see their next birthday. The tablets came out. Well-dressed volunteers moved through the aisles, each one carrying an iPad with a donation form loaded and ready. The suggested amount started at $5,000. Evan watched a woman in the front row tap her screen 3 times. $10,000 donated with less effort than it took to order coffee. Around the room, others followed. The total appeared on the screens, replacing the children's faces. $127,000, then $245,000, then $483,000. Harper clasped her hands together like she was praying. Nashville, you are incredible. You are, but we're not done yet, because I want to tell you about one child in particular. No. Evan's hands clenched into fists. This is Mia Brooks. Mia's face appeared alone on both screens, enormous and vulnerable. She's 9 years old. She loves reading and drawing and making her dad laugh, and she needs heart surgery that her family can't afford. When I met her story, I knew. I just knew. We had to help. Evan's vision narrowed. Harper had never met Mia. She'd never visited the hospital. She'd never spent 3 a.m. holding a terrified child who couldn't sleep because every heartbeat felt wrong. So here's what we're going to do. Harper's smile was radiant. Every dollar donated in the next 5 minutes will be matched by my foundation. Dollar for dollar. Let's change this little girl's life. The donation total exploded. People were standing now, waving their tablets, competing to see who could give more. $850,000, $1.2 million, $1.7 million. Evan's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Brooks, this is Jennifer Valdez from the Children's Hope Foundation. I wanted to personally inform you that we've selected Mia as a featured recipient for tonight's gala. Ms. Weston is highlighting her case, and we anticipate receiving enough donations to fully fund her surgery. You're using her picture without permission. Actually, you granted permission when you signed the intake forms at St. Thomas Hospital. There's a clause about educational and fundraising purposes. But Mr. Brooks, this is wonderful news. Your daughter is going to get the help she needs. How much of the money donated tonight will actually go to her surgery? Silence. Then, carefully. Our foundation has operational costs, as I'm sure you understand, but we absolutely prioritize direct patient care. How much? We distribute funds based on need assessment and processing timelines. I can send you our annual report if you'd like to review our allocation methodology. How much of the money people are donating right now, thinking they're saving my daughter's life, will actually pay for her surgery? Another pause. I'm not authorized to discuss specific distribution percentages. But Mr. Brooks, I want to assure you that your daughter is a priority for... Evan hung up. On stage, Harper was wiping away tears that might or might not be real. The donation total had crossed $2 million. $2 million raised using Mia's face, Mia's story, Mia's fear, and Evan would be lucky if they saw 10 cents on the dollar. Thank you, Harper breathed into the microphone. Thank you so much. You've just restored my faith in humanity. And now, to celebrate what we've accomplished tonight, I want to do something special. I want to share this moment with someone who represents the heart of what we're fighting for. She shaded her eyes against the spotlight and looked out into the crowd. Her gaze swept the VIP section, then moved toward the back of the room, toward the service area where staff were supposed to be invisible, toward Evan. You, sir. Yes, you by the door. Come here, please. Every head in the auditorium turned. Evan froze. Harper was pointing directly at him, her smile encouraging, her gesture insistent. Don't be shy. Everyone, let's encourage him. Come on up here. The applause started, friendly, warm, urging him forward. People were standing, waving him toward the stage. A spotlight swung around and pinned him against the back wall like a moth on a board. Evan looked down at his uniform, the gray shirt with Elite Services embroidered over the pocket, the rubber gloves still on his hands from handling trash. He looked at Harper, radiant in her silver gown, completely in control of her domain. And he thought about Mia on those screens. About $2 million raised in her name, while a foundation representative couldn't tell him how much would actually help her. About a woman who'd built an empire on a voice that might not be entirely her own, now using his daughter's illness to burnish her reputation as a humanitarian. Evan pulled off his gloves and started walking. The crowd parted for him, their applause growing louder. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. A woman in a diamond necklace smiled like he was a child participating in a school play. He climbed the steps to the stage, the lights blinding after the relative darkness of the auditorium. Harper extended her hand. Her smile was perfect. Not too much, not too little. Just the right blend of warmth and sincerity. What's your name? The microphone was inches from his face. 500 people watching in person, cameras streaming to millions more online. This was the moment to say something gracious, to thank Harper for her generosity, to play along with whatever inspirational moment she'd orchestrated. Evan Brooks. Harper's eyes widened fractionally, so quick most people probably missed it, but Evan saw the recognition, saw her make the connection between his name and the face that had been on her screens. Evan? She repeated, her voice somehow growing even warmer. Are you Mia's father? The crowd gasped. The applause became thunderous. Harper seized his hand with both of hers, squeezing like they were old friends reunited after years apart. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mia's dad. This is the man we're helping tonight. Evan, I want you to know that we're going to take care of your little girl. We're going to make sure she gets everything she needs. The crowd was on its feet. Someone was crying. The cameras pushed closer, capturing every angle of this perfect moment of compassion and celebrity benevolence. Harper leaned close, her lips near his ear, her voice dropping below what the microphone could catch. Play along. Smile. Make this moment matter. But Evan wasn't looking at Harper. He was looking past her, toward the sound booth at the back of the auditorium, looking at the mixing board and the rack of processing equipment and the laptop running the backing tracks. I need to ask you something, Evan said, his voice level, speaking directly into the microphone. Harper's smile never wavered, but her grip on his hand tightened. Of course. Anything. This afternoon during sound check when you rehearsed Hold On, What were you using for the bridge? What track was cued on channel 7? The auditorium went very quiet. Harper's smile flickered. I'm not sure what you're asking. Channel 7 on your mixing board. The track labeled Bridge Vocal Support. I saw the engineer load it during rehearsal. Evan hadn't seen anything, but he'd spent enough years in studios to know how these things worked. What's on that track? That's a backing vocal, harmony support. Harper's publicist was moving toward the stage, urgency in every step. I'm not sure why we're discussing technical details at a charity event. It's not harmony. Evan kept his voice calm. It's lead vocal, pre-recorded, the exact note you're famous for. The crowd shifted, confused murmurs rippling through the rows. Harper tried to pull her hand free, but Evan held on, not aggressively, just firmly enough that they stayed connected in front of all those cameras. I think you're mistaken, Harper said, her smile now looking strained. I've been singing that note for 15 years. Everyone knows. Then sing it now, right now. No track, no processing, just you and the microphone. This is absurd. Harper finally yanked her hand free. I'm not going to be ambushed at my own charity event by... She caught herself, reset her expression. By someone who clearly doesn't understand how professional audio production works. I understand perfectly. I spent 6 years working in the industry before I walked away. Evan turned to face the crowd. I'm not trying to ruin anyone's night. I'm just asking a simple question. If Harper can really hit that note, the note that made her famous, the note she's been selling for 15 years, then she should be able to do it right now, unprocessed, unenhanced, just her voice. The silence in the Ryman auditorium was absolute. 500 of Nashville's elite sat frozen, unsure whether they were watching a breakdown or a revelation. The live stream chat was probably exploding. Harper's publicist had reached the stage. She was speaking urgently to someone on her headset, gesturing toward security, but Harper waved her off. She straightened her shoulders and walked back to center stage, positioning herself at the microphone. Fine, she said, her voice cold now, all pretense of warmth abandoned. You want to hear me sing? Let me show you exactly what I think of people who try to tear down others. She nodded to her music director. The opening notes of Hold On began again, piano only this time, no backing tracks, no orchestration. Harper's voice came in clear and strong, hitting every note in the lower register perfectly. Evan watched the sound booth. The engineer was bent over his board, hands moving across faders. Whatever was about to happen, it would happen in the next 30 seconds. The song built toward the bridge. Harper's voice climbed the scale. Her technique was solid, proper breath support, good resonance, clean tone production. She was a genuinely talented singer, just maybe not talented enough for the note that had defined her career. The moment approached. Harper's hand pressed against her heart. Her head tilted back. She opened her mouth and... The note came out thin, strained, a full step flat. She tried to correct, pushing harder, but overcorrected and went sharp. The vibrato turned into a wobble. She held it for maybe 3 seconds before her voice gave out entirely, ending the note early with a cough that she tried to disguise as artistic choice. The crowd didn't know how to react. A few people clapped uncertainly. Most just sat there, confused, waiting for someone to tell them what they'd just witnessed. Evan pulled out his phone. That note you just attempted? That's a D-sharp 6, approximately 1,244 hertz. The note on your recordings, the one you're famous for, sits cleanly at 1,218 hertz. That's an E6. You just missed it by a full semitone. I was affected by... Harper started, but Evan kept talking. I have 17 live performances downloaded here. Different venues, different dates, going back 8 years. You want to know what's interesting? In every single one, when you hit that note, there's no visible breath support. Your abdomen doesn't engage. Your throat doesn't show tension. And the frequency analysis shows a consistency that's impossible in live performance. The note is identical, exactly identical, every single time. He looked up from his phone. Harper's face had gone pale under her stage makeup. That's not possible, Evan continued, unless it's not actually you singing it. Get him off my stage. Harper's voice was shaking now, the careful control finally breaking. Get him off right now. But before security could move, a voice called out from the sound booth. She's right. It's not her. Every head turned. Harper's sound engineer stood at the railing of the booth, his hands gripping the metal bar. "I've been running the track for 7 years," he said, his voice carrying in the shocked silence. Harper can't hit that note. She never could. The vocal is from a session singer named Melissa Torres. We recorded it in 2016, and we've been using it ever since. The auditorium exploded. People were shouting, pulling out phones, trying to process what they'd just heard. Harper stood frozen at center stage, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "You're fired," she finally managed. "You're absolutely fired, and I'll sue you for telling the truth?" The engineer shook his head. "I've got the session files, the contracts, the payments to Melissa, all of it. I kept copies because I knew someday this would come out." Harper turned on Evan, her face twisted with rage. "You have no idea what you've just done. No idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." Evan's voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You're someone who uses sick children to make yourself look good, who raises millions of dollars in their names while spending most of it on yourself, who built a career on someone else's voice and someone else's talent. And when your engineer just told the truth, your first instinct was to threaten him. I've given more to charity than you'll make in your entire lifetime. You've given press releases and photo opportunities. You've given people like me false hope while taking their children's faces for your publicity machine. My daughter is up on those screens right now, and I never gave you permission to use her that way. I never agreed to let you profit off her illness." Harper looked out at the crowd, at the donors, the celebrities, the media cameras still recording everything. Evan could see her calculating, trying to find the angle that would salvage this, trying to find the narrative that would make her the victim. "Everyone here knows I'm a real singer," she said, her voice strengthening. "I've done hundreds of shows. I have 7 Grammys. Just because I use studio support on one note doesn't negate 15 years of Then prove it." Evan stepped forward. "Sing it, right now. Show everyone that your engineer is lying. Hit the note you're famous for, and I'll apologize to everyone in this room. I'll call myself a liar on every social media platform you want. But if you can't," he paused, "if you can't, then everything else gets questioned. Every award, every accolade, every charity event where you used your reputation to raise money. All of it." The crowd was leaning forward again, caught between horror and fascination. This had stopped being entertainment. This was something else. Something rawer and more real than anything they'd paid to see. Harper looked at her band, at her publicist, at the security team hovering at the stage edges. Everyone was waiting for her to make a decision. She walked back to the microphone. "Fine. One more time. But this time," she pointed at Evan, "you sing it too. If you're such an expert, if you think you know so much about what I can and can't do, then you prove it." The challenge hung in the air. Evan felt the weight of 500 gazes. Behind those gazes, millions more watching the live stream. He thought about Mia in her hospital bed, probably watching this on someone's tablet. Thought about what Sarah would say if she could see him now, standing on the Ryman stage in his janitor's uniform, about to either vindicate himself or become Nashville's biggest fool. "Okay," he said simply. Harper's eyebrows rose. She'd expected him to back down, but she recovered quickly, gesturing to the music director. "From the bridge, piano and vocal only." The piano started. Evan closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He thought about singing not as a father trying to comfort his daughter, but as a performer. He felt his body remember how to stand, how to breathe, how to let the sound come from somewhere deeper than just his throat. Harper sang first. She gave it everything. Full power, maximum technique, every trick she'd learned in 15 years of professional performance. The note came out stronger than before. Better. But still not quite there. Still a little flat, still wavering at the end. Then it was Evan's turn. He thought about Mia's smile when she was healthy, about Sarah's hand in his the night before she died, about every choice he'd made and every sacrifice he'd accepted and every moment he'd wondered if walking away from music had been the right decision. And he sang. The note came out clean and pure, not perfect, but real. He hit the E6 and held it, feeling his voice open up in ways it hadn't in years. Then, because Harper had asked for proof, he went higher. E sharp. F. He held the F6 for 3 full seconds before bringing it back down in a controlled descent. The auditorium erupted. People were on their feet, screaming, applauding, their faces showing the kind of raw emotion that Harper had been trying to manufacture all night. This wasn't performance. This was truth, and everyone could hear the difference. Evan opened his eyes. Harper stood 5 feet away, her face unreadable. The applause continued, wave after wave crashing against the stage. The live stream view counter was spinning so fast it was almost unreadable. "I never wanted this," Evan said, speaking just to Harper now, his voice too quiet for the microphone. "I never wanted to come after you. I just wanted my daughter to live." Harper's eyes glistened, real tears this time, Evan thought. "You just destroyed everything I built." "No, you did that yourself. I just stopped pretending not to see it." Security was moving in now, finally getting their instructions, but it was too late. The truth was out. The live stream had caught everything. By morning, every news outlet in the country would be running the story. Harper Weston, exposed by a janitor. As security escorted him off the stage, Evan looked back one last time. Harper stood alone under the spotlight, the crowd still applauding, but the sound taking on a different quality now. Not celebration, uncertainty, the beginning of doubt. And Evan thought, not with satisfaction, but with the kind of exhausted certainty that came from finally doing something that couldn't be undone, that sometimes systems only changed when people refused to stay quiet. Even when staying quiet would have been so much easier. The security guard's hands on his shoulders were firm, but not rough. They guided Evan down the stage steps, while behind them, Harper's publicist was already at the microphone, her voice professionally calm as she tried to regain control of the narrative. Something about technical difficulties and misunderstandings, and how they'd be releasing a full statement. But her words were drowned out by the chaos in the auditorium, hundreds of conversations erupting simultaneously, phones held high, capturing every moment, the foundation volunteers frozen in the aisles with their donation tablets. Evan let himself be led through the service corridor without resistance. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. What had he done? He just accused one of the most powerful women in country music of fraud in front of millions of witnesses. He'd exposed her biggest secret on a live stream that was probably being downloaded and shared across every platform imaginable. And he'd done it while wearing a janitor's uniform with his name embroidered on the pocket. "Sir, we're going to need you to wait in the security office." The guard on his left was young, maybe 25, and he kept glancing back toward the stage like he couldn't quite believe what he'd just witnessed. "Management wants to speak with you before you leave." They turned a corner and nearly collided with Harper's sound engineer. Marcus Chen had worked with Harper for 7 years, according to the articles Evan had read during his research. He was standing against the wall, his face pale, his phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care," Marcus was saying to whoever was on the other end. "I'm done lying. If they want to sue me, let them sue. I've got everything documented." He ended the call and looked at Evan. "That was my lawyer. He thinks I'm insane." "You didn't have to back me up," Evan said. "You didn't have to say anything." "Yes, I did." Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. "I've been waiting 7 years for someone to call it out. 7 years of running that track every single show, watching Harper take credit for someone else's talent, watching her build an empire on a lie. You know what the worst part is? Melissa Torres, the woman who actually sang that note, she got paid $3,000. $3,000 for the vocal that made Harper Weston a superstar. One of the security guards cleared his throat. "Sir, we really need to—" "Where is she?" A woman's voice echoed down the corridor. "Where's the man who was on stage?" They all turned. A woman in her 50s was striding toward them, her press credentials bouncing against her chest. Behind her, a cameraman struggled to keep up. "Mr. Brooks? I'm Diane Sutherland from News Channel 5. Can I ask you a few questions?" "No press," the security guard said immediately. "Ma'am, you need to return to the auditorium." "The auditorium is in chaos." Half the crowd is demanding refunds, and Harper's team has locked themselves in her dressing room. Diane pulled out her phone and showed Evan the screen. "You're trending #1 nationwide. Janitor exposes Harper Weston. 20 million views in the last 15 minutes. Evan's stomach dropped. 20 million people had watched him destroy someone's career. 20 million people had seen him in his work uniform calling out one of the biggest stars in music. "I need to go," he said suddenly. I need to get to the hospital. Sir, management still wants to speak with you. Then they can call me. Evan pulled free from the guard's loose grip. My daughter is in a hospital room watching this on TV, and she's probably terrified. I need to be with her. He pushed past Diane and her cameraman, past Marcus, who called something after him, past a cluster of staff members who stared as he went by. He found the employee exit and burst out into the Nashville night, the December air cold against his flushed face. His truck was parked 3 blocks away in the employee lot. Evan ran the whole distance, his dress shoes slapping against pavement, his breath coming in white clouds. He fumbled with his keys and finally got the door open, sliding behind the wheel of the 15-year-old Tacoma that had been Sarah's before she got too sick to drive. His phone was ringing. Unknown number. He ignored it. It rang again immediately. Another unknown number. Then a text from his supervisor at Elite Services. Call me now. Evan started the engine and pulled out of the lot. The drive to St. Thomas Hospital normally took 20 minutes. He made it in 12, his mind racing faster than the truck. What would he tell Mia? How could he explain what she'd just seen? She was 9 years old. She didn't understand industry politics or corporate fraud or why her father had just humiliated someone on live television. The parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. Evan took the elevator to the 4th floor, the pediatric cardiac unit, and tried to compose himself as he walked the familiar corridor. Room 447. Mia's room for the past 3 months, the walls covered with her drawings and the shelf stacked with books they'd read together during his visits. He could hear voices inside. Multiple voices. Evan pushed open the door and stopped. Mia was sitting up in bed, her dark hair pulled back in the ponytail she insisted on, even though the IV made it difficult. Her oxygen cannula was in place, the monitor beside her bed showing numbers Evan had learned to interpret with the precision of a cardiac nurse. But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the 3 people crowded around her bed. Carol, the night nurse, doctor. Reeves, her cardiologist, and a woman Evan didn't recognize in an expensive suit. Daddy! Mia's face lit up. Daddy, you were on TV. You were singing, and everyone was clapping, and that lady was so mean to you, but you sang better than her, and… Mia, honey, take a breath. Evan moved to her side, checking her oxygen saturation automatically. 94%. Not terrible, but not great. You're supposed to be sleeping. How could I sleep? You were on TV singing. You never sing anymore. Not like that. Not the way you used to before… She stopped, the light in her eyes dimming slightly. Before your mom died. Evan knew what she'd been about to say. Before everything changed. Dr. Reeves stepped forward. He was in his 60s with kind eyes and an eternal bow tie collection that Mia loved. Tonight's bow tie had little hearts on it. Mr. Brooks, I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about the publicity from tonight's event. The publicity? Evan looked at the woman in the suit. Who are you? Samantha Rodriguez. I'm the director of communications for St. Thomas Hospital. She extended her hand, which Evan didn't take. Mr. Brooks, I want you to know that the hospital had no involvement in your daughter's image being used at tonight's gala. We provide photos to accredited charities upon request, but we had no knowledge that you gave them her picture. Evan's voice was flat. Without asking me. Without telling me they were going to put her face on massive screens in front of millions of people. The consent form you signed when Mia was admitted includes a clause about educational and fundraising purposes. Educational and fundraising for the hospital, not for some celebrity's vanity charity that spends 90 cents on the dollar on operational costs. Samantha's expression tightened. I understand you're upset, and you have every right to be. But what I need you to understand is that your actions tonight have created a significant situation. The Children's Hope Foundation is threatening to pull their partnership with us. They're claiming you defamed them and Harper Weston in front of a global audience. I told the truth. Perhaps. But the truth has consequences, Mr. Brooks. She pulled a tablet from her leather bag and turned it toward him. This is the hospital's patient portal. Do you see the funding column next to Mia's name? Evan looked. The number that had been there this morning, the partial commitment from the Children's Hope Foundation that Carol had mentioned, was gone, replaced by zeros. They've rescinded their pledge, Samantha continued. Not just for Mia, for 17 other children who were supposed to receive support from tonight's gala. They're claiming the event was compromised by your accusations, and they can't in good conscience distribute funds raised under false pretenses. The room tilted. Evan grabbed the bed rail to steady himself. They're punishing sick kids because I exposed them? They're protecting themselves from a scandal, which, from a legal standpoint, is exactly what their attorneys would advise. Samantha's voice softened slightly. Mr. Brooks, I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here because the hospital needs to know. Do you plan to pursue this further? Are you going to press charges or make additional statements to the media? I don't know. Evan looked at Mia, who was watching him with those wide brown eyes that missed nothing. I wasn't planning any of this. It just happened. Well, it's happening very quickly now. Dr. Reeves pulled out his own phone. I've had 4 calls in the last hour, 2 from reporters, 1 from hospital administration, and 1 from a lawyer representing Harper Weston. She's planning to sue you for defamation. She's claiming you knowingly made false statements that damaged her reputation and her charitable work. Evan laughed, a short, bitter sound. She's suing me. She's the one who's been lying for years. Can you prove it? Samantha asked. Can you prove in court, with documentation and expert testimony, that Harper Weston has been using a pre-recorded vocal? Because her legal team will have their own experts. They'll have audio engineers who will testify that what you heard was standard performance enhancement used by every major artist. They'll have musicologists who will explain that variations in live performance are normal and expected. And they'll have 15 years of successful concerts and 7 Grammy Awards as evidence that she's a legitimate artist. I have her sound engineer, Marcus Chen. He admitted everything on camera. An engineer she fired minutes after his statement. Samantha pulled up another screen. Who is now claiming he was coerced and speaking under duress, who has already retained legal counsel and issued a retraction through his attorney. The air went out of Evan's lungs. He took it back? 20 minutes ago, posted on his social media accounts and sent to every major news outlet. She turned the tablet around. There was Marcus's face above a statement typed in formal legal language. I deeply regret my statements made at tonight's event. I was emotionally distraught and spoke without considering the full context of Miss Weston's artistic process. The technical elements I referenced are standard industry practices and in no way represent fraud or deception. He's lying. Evan's hands clenched into fists. He told me he had documentation, session files, contracts, payments to the actual singer. Do you have any of that documentation? No, it's his. He said a lot of things he's now denying. Samantha put the tablet away. Mr. Brooks, I need you to understand your position. You're a janitor who makes $32,000 a year. Harper Weston has a net worth estimated at $75 million. Her legal team consists of some of the most expensive entertainment lawyers in the country. If she sues you for defamation, you'll be buried in legal fees before the case even gets to discovery. Then I'll represent myself. And lose, definitely and completely. Dr. Reeves moved closer, his voice gentle. Evan, I've known you for 3 years. I know you're a good father who would do anything for his daughter, but what you did tonight, however justified it might feel, put Mia at risk. Evan looked at his daughter. She'd pulled her blanket up to her chin, her eyes darting between the adults, trying to understand the tension crackling through the room. How long? He asked quietly. How long does Mia have if we don't do the surgery? Dr. Reeves hesitated. Her heart is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. The regurgitation is increasing, which means her heart is working progressively harder to pump blood. If we don't intervene soon, we risk permanent damage to the cardiac muscle. After that point, even surgery might not restore full function. How long? 6 weeks, maybe 8. After that, we're looking at a heart transplant scenario, which is far more complicated and has significantly lower success rates for pediatric patients. 6 weeks. Evan closed his eyes. He'd been trying to raise $400,000 for months. Every attempt had failed, every loan application rejected, every fundraiser falling short. And now the one source that might have helped, the foundation that had used Mia's face to guilt people into donating, had pulled their support entirely. There might be another option, Samantha said carefully. Harper's attorney mentioned that they'd be willing to discuss a settlement. If you were to issue a public apology, admit that you made your statements in emotional distress without proper evidence, and agree not to make any further claims about Ms. Weston's vocal abilities. They'll pay for Mia's surgery, Evan finished. That's the offer? The attorney suggested they would make a goodwill donation to Mia's medical fund, enough to cover the remaining costs, and they'd set up an educational scholarship in her name, $200,000 for college. It was a good offer, more than good. It was everything Evan needed. Mia's surgery fully funded, her future secured. All he had to do was call himself a liar, stand in front of cameras and say that he'd been wrong, that he'd been emotionally compromised, that Harper Weston was exactly the talented artist and generous philanthropist she claimed to be. "Daddy?" Mia's small voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you okay?" He opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was so small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that kept her alive. Her face was the same face Sarah had loved, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin. She'd inherited Sarah's fierce spirit too, that refusal to accept things just because someone with authority said they were true. Sarah had been a teacher before the cancer. She'd taught high school English, and she'd always told her students the same thing: the truth matters. Even when it's hard, even when it costs you something, especially then. "Mr. Brooks?" Samantha prompted. "The offer is only available for the next 24 hours. After that, Harper's team will proceed with their lawsuit, and there won't be another opportunity for settlement." Evan pulled out his phone. His social media accounts were exploding, thousands of messages, most supportive, some viciously attacking him. He clicked on the video that someone had posted. The moment on stage. Harper failing to hit the note. Evan succeeding. The applause. The chaos. 27 million views now, growing by the second. He scrolled through the comments. Most were shocked, outraged, calling for Harper to be investigated. But there were others too. People defending her, people saying Evan was jealous, bitter, trying to ride her fame, people questioning his motives, his mental state, his fitness as a parent for putting his daughter through this. "I need time," he said. "I need to think." "You have 24 hours, Samantha replied. "But Mr. Brooks, I want to be very clear about something. If you don't take this offer, if you try to fight Harper Weston in court, you will lose everything. Your savings, your home, potentially even custody of your daughter if her attorneys argue that your actions put her medical care at risk. They can't take Mia. They can argue that you prioritized your ego over her well-being, that you destroyed the charitable relationship that would have funded her surgery just to humiliate a celebrity. Family court judges have removed children from parents for less." The threat hung in the air, sharp and terrible. Evan looked at Dr. Reeves. "Is that true? Could they really?" "I don't know." Dr. Reeves spread his hands. "I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that Mia needs stability right now. She needs to know that her surgery is going to happen and that her father will be there with her. Anything that creates uncertainty or additional stress isn't good for her heart. I know." Evan moved to Mia's bedside and sat down in the chair he had occupied for hundreds of hours over the past 3 years. "Baby girl, I need you to close your eyes and try to rest. The grown-ups need to talk about some boring stuff." "Is the mean lady going to hurt us?" Mia asked, her voice small. "No one's going to hurt us. But she has lots of money, and you said people with lots of money can do mean things because no one stops them." Evan's chest tightened. He'd said that. Late one night when he thought Mia was asleep, when he'd been on the phone with yet another hospital billing representative who'd explained with mechanical sympathy why their payment plan application had been denied. Mia had heard. Of course she'd heard. She heard everything. "Sometimes that's true," Evan admitted, "but sometimes people with less money have something more important. They have the truth. And the truth is stronger than money." "Is it stronger than lawyers?" Out of the mouths of children. Evan managed a smile. "We're going to find out, sweetheart. Now close your eyes, please." Mia obeyed reluctantly, settling back against her pillows. Carol adjusted her oxygen and checked her monitors, then nodded to Evan. The numbers were stable, for now. Samantha gestured to the hallway, and Evan followed her and Dr. Reeves outside. The corridor was quiet at this hour, most of the other children sleeping. their parents dozing in bedside chairs or trying to find rest in the family waiting area. "You're going to refuse the settlement," Samantha said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to tell the truth, whatever that costs. It will cost your daughter's life." Her voice was sharp now, the professional facade cracking. "Do you understand that? This isn't about pride or principles anymore. This is about a 9-year-old girl whose heart is failing. If you don't take this money, she dies. It's that simple. If I take this money, I teach her that the truth doesn't matter, that powerful people can buy their way out of consequences, that her father can be purchased for the right price." Evan's voice shook. "She'll live, but she'll grow up believing that's how the world works. That's not the life Sarah would have wanted for her." Dr. Reeves put a hand on his shoulder. "Sarah isn't here. You are, and you have to make this choice." "I know." Evan pulled away. "And I need you both to leave now. I need to be with my daughter." He didn't wait for their response. He went back into the room and closed the door firmly behind him. Mia's eyes opened immediately. "You weren't sleeping," Evan said. "I was listening. I'm good at listening." She pushed herself up slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her IV. "Daddy, are you going to fight the mean lady?" "I'm going to do what's right. Even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard." Mia was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, "Mom would be proud of you." The words hit Evan like a physical blow. He dropped into the chair beside her bed and took her small hand in his, careful of the IV port. "You remember Mom?" "Not as much as I want to, but I remember she always told the truth, even when the doctors said things she didn't want to hear." Mia's fingers tightened around his. "She told me I was sick before you did. She said I deserved to know, that lying to protect someone just makes them weaker." Sarah had said that, the week before she died, when they'd finally told 6-year-old Mia about her mother's cancer. Evan had wanted to wait, to spare her the fear and grief. But Sarah had insisted. Mia deserves truth, not protection from reality. "Your mom was braver than I am," Evan said softly. "No, she wasn't. She told me that too. She said you were the bravest person she knew because you kept going even when you were scared." Mia's eyes were drifting closed now, exhaustion finally winning. "So keep going, Daddy. Even if you're scared." Evan sat there holding her hand until her breathing deepened and her monitors showed the steady rhythm of sleep. Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. The first was to his supervisor at Elite Services. That conversation lasted 3 minutes and ended with Evan being terminated effective immediately for bringing negative publicity to the company. The second call was to the warehouse where he worked nights. Same result. Apparently 27 million viral views made you unemployable. The third call was to every journalist who'd tried to reach him. He set up interviews for the morning. All of them. If Harper wanted a war, he'd give her one. But he'd fight it in public where her money had less power than the truth. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number, but Evan answered anyway. "Mr. Brooks? This is Melissa Torres." Evan sat up straighter. "The singer? The one who actually sang the note that made Harper Weston famous?" "Yes." Her voice was warm with a slight Texas accent. "I've been watching the news. I've been watching for 7 years, actually, waiting for someone to finally call her out. Marcus Chen said you got paid $3,000. $3,000 and a non-disclosure agreement that will bankrupt me if I violate it." Melissa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "But here's the thing, NDAs don't apply if someone else reveals the truth first. You did that. You opened the door, so now I can walk through it. You'll testify? You'll come forward with evidence? I'll do better than that. I have the original session files. I have the contract showing Harper's team hired me specifically to record the high note because she couldn't hit it. I have emails from her vocal coach admitting that her range tops out at D6, and I have 17 separate recordings where my voice was used in place of hers." Melissa paused. "I also have a lawyer who's been waiting 7 years for this moment. He works on contingency for cases like this, cases where the truth got buried by money and power." Evan's hand trembled as he gripped the phone. "Why? Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Because you have something I don't have. You have nothing left to lose." Her voice softened. "I read about your daughter. I know why you did what you did tonight. And I'm a mother too. If I can help save that little girl by finally telling the truth about Harper Weston, then that's what I'm going to do. She gave him her lawyer's contact information and made him promise to call first thing in the morning. When Evan hung up, he sat in the darkness of Mia's hospital room and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was dangerous. Hope had disappointed him so many times before. But as he watched his daughter sleep, her chest rising and falling with the support of oxygen she shouldn't need, he thought about what Sarah used to say about systems that seemed impossible to change. Someone has to be first. Someone has to refuse to play along. And sometimes that someone is just an ordinary person who got tired of pretending the emperor was wearing clothes. Evan pulled out his laptop, the old one that barely held a charge, and started writing. An email to the journalists. A statement laying out everything he knew, everything Marcus had said before he recanted, everything he'd observed over 5 years of working in an industry that valued image over integrity. He wrote until dawn broke over Nashville, until the nurses changed shifts and Carol came to say goodbye. He wrote until Dr. Reeves appeared in the doorway with coffee and the kind of worried expression that meant bad news. The hospital board met last night, Dr. Reeves said quietly. They've asked me to remove myself from Mia's case. Evan's blood went cold. What? Why? Conflict of interest. My statement to the press about Mia's condition and timeline. Harper's team is claiming I violated patient privacy to support your narrative. He set the coffee down on the side table. I'm fighting it. But in the meantime, they're assigning another cardiologist, Dr. Patricia Chen. She's excellent, probably better than me if I'm being honest, but I don't know her. Mia doesn't know her. Yes, Evan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Mia stirred but didn't wake. They're isolating us, removing everyone who might support us. That's my assessment too. Dr. Reeves handed him the coffee. Drink this. You're going to need it, because there's something else. Harper's legal team filed an emergency injunction last night. They're asking the court to prohibit you from making any further public statements about her until the defamation case is resolved. They can't do that. First Amendment can be restricted under certain circumstances. If they convince a judge that your statements constitute ongoing defamation that's causing immediate and irreparable harm to their client, they might get a temporary gag order. Dr. Reeves pulled up the court filing on his phone. The hearing is scheduled for 11 this morning. You need to be there. And you need a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer. Then you need to find one who'll work for free. Because if you lose this hearing, you lose your voice. And without your voice, Harper controls the entire narrative. Evan looked at his daughter, still sleeping peacefully despite the machinery and the strangers making decisions about her life. He thought about the email he'd just written, the journalist waiting for his statement, Melissa Torres and her evidence, and her lawyer who believed the truth mattered more than money. He thought about Sarah, who taught her students that speaking up was worth the risk, and he thought about the man he'd been before all of this, before the grief and the fear and the crushing weight of impossible choices. The man who'd walked onto a talent show stage at 18 years old with nothing but his voice and the absolute certainty that he deserved to be heard. I'll find a lawyer, Evan said, and I'll be at that hearing, but I'm not staying quiet. Whatever they do to me, I'm not staying quiet. Dr. Reeves nodded slowly. Your wife would be proud of you. I know I am. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I don't think you're wrong about Harper. I've worked enough charity events over the years to see how they operate. The foundations, the galas, the corporate sponsors, it's all theater. Very little of it actually helps the patients, but no one says anything because everyone's afraid of losing access to the money that does trickle down. Then maybe it's time someone said something. Maybe it is. Dr. Reeves managed a tired smile. I'll do what I can to fight the board's decision. In the meantime, Dr. Chen will take excellent care of Mia. I promise you that. After he left, Evan sat back down and finished writing his statement. He sent it to 15 journalists, posted it on every social media platform he had access to, and then called Melissa Torres' lawyer. His name was David Park, and he sounded exactly like someone who'd been waiting 7 years for this fight. Mr. Brooks, he said, his voice sharp with energy despite the early hour. Let's talk about destroying Harper Weston's empire. David Park's office occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse in East Nashville, The kind of building that still had exposed brick and original hardwood floors that creaked under your weight. Evan arrived at 9:30, 2 hours before the emergency hearing, his eyes burning from lack of sleep and his stomach churning with coffee and adrenaline. A young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings buzzed him through the security door. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Jenny, Mr. Park's paralegal. He's expecting you." She led him down a narrow hallway lined with filing cabinets and framed newspaper clippings. Evan caught glimpses of headlines as they passed. Local attorney wins $3 settlement against record label. Music industry fraud exposed in landmark case. David Park, the lawyer Nashville's elite love to hate. The office at the end of the hall was cramped and chaotic, every surface covered with legal documents, case files, and what appeared to be at least 6 different laptops in various states of operation. David Park sat behind a desk that looked like it had survived a small explosion, his fingers flying across a keyboard. He was younger than Evan expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and the kind of intensity that suggested he ran on caffeine and righteous anger. "Sit," David said without looking up. "I'm finishing a motion to dismiss Harper's injunction request. You drink coffee? Jenny, get him coffee. The good stuff, not the sludge I drink." He finally looked at Evan, his dark eyes assessing. "You look like hell." "I've had better weeks." "You're about to have a worse morning. Harper's legal team filed an amended complaint 20 minutes ago. They're not just asking for a gag order anymore. They're requesting an emergency psychiatric evaluation." David spun his laptop around so Evan could see the document. "They're arguing that your behavior at the gala demonstrated a break from reality potentially dangerous to yourself and your daughter. They want a court-ordered psych eval before you're allowed unsupervised contact with Mia." The words blurred on the screen. Evan gripped the edge of the desk. "They're trying to take her away from me. They're trying to scare you into settling. Classic intimidation tactic. Go after the thing you care about most. Make you so terrified of losing it that you'll agree to anything." David pulled the laptop back and kept typing. "But here's what they don't know. Melissa Torres landed at Nashville International 40 minutes ago. She's bringing physical evidence, the original master files from the recording session, including timestamps, frequency analysis, and contractual documentation proving Harper paid her to record vocals that were then presented as Harper's own work." Marcus Chen retracted his statement. "Won't that undermine Melissa's credibility?" Marcus was coerced into retracting. "I've already got 3 witnesses who will testify that Harper's team threatened to blacklist him from the entire industry if he didn't recant. Fear-based retractions actually strengthen our case. They demonstrate a pattern of intimidation and suppression of truth." David hit a final key with emphasis and sat back. "Here's what's going to happen in that courtroom. Harper's attorney, a man named Richard Voss, who charges $800 an hour, will argue that you're an unstable individual having a mental health crisis. He'll paint you as a failed musician bitter about your career, jealous of Harper's success, willing to exploit your sick daughter for attention. He'll present expert testimony about audio production techniques and how what you interpreted as fraud is actually standard industry practice. And he'll ask the judge to silence you immediately before you cause further damage to his client's reputation and livelihood. And what are we going to do? We're going to let him talk himself into a corner. Then we're going to present Melissa Torres, who will testify under oath that she was hired specifically because Harper couldn't hit the note that became her signature. We're going to present the session files that prove the vocal everyone knows as Harper's is actually Melissa's. And we're going to present testimony from other industry professionals who've been silenced by NDAs and intimidation, but are now willing to come forward because you gave them cover." David leaned forward. "Evan, you didn't just expose one lie. You kicked open a door that Harper's been keeping locked for 15 years. And now everything behind that door is spilling out." Jenny returned with coffee in a mug that said, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." Evan wrapped his hands around it, grateful for the warmth. "There's something else," David continued. "The social media response to your statement this morning. It's exploding, 43 million views and counting. Musicians are coming forward with their own stories about Harper, backing vocalists who were uncredited, songwriters who didn't get paid, opening acts who were blacklisted after they outshone her. The narrative is shifting. You're not the villain anymore. You're the whistleblower. Evan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and felt his stomach drop. St. Thomas Hospital. He answered immediately. Mr. Brooks, this is Dr. Chen. I've reviewed Mia's charts, and I'm concerned about her overnight numbers. Her oxygen saturation dropped to 87% around 4 a.m. We've increased her supplemental oxygen, but I'd like to discuss moving the surgery timeline up even further. How much further? Within the next 2 weeks, if possible. Her heart is decompensating faster than the previous projections indicated. Dr. Chen's voice was professionally calm, but Evan heard the urgency underneath. I know the financial situation is complicated, but from a purely medical standpoint, we can't afford to wait much longer. 2 weeks. The same timeline the foundation had given him before pulling their support. Except now he had no foundation, no settlement offer, and 2 jobs he'd already lost. I'll figure it out, Evan said. Just keep her stable. We'll do everything we can, but Mr. Brooks, I need you to understand the reality here. Without intervention soon, Mia's prognosis becomes significantly worse. We're approaching the point where surgery might not be enough. The call ended. David was watching him with an expression that suggested he'd heard enough to understand. The surgery costs $400,000, Evan said flatly. I have $17,000 in savings. Harper's settlement offer would have covered everything. Now she's suing me instead, and my daughter has 2 weeks. Then we win this case fast, and we win it decisively. David stood and grabbed a leather messenger bag that had seen better days. Because Harper's not just going to lose this lawsuit. She's going to lose her credibility, her contracts, and her ability to weaponize the legal system against people who can't afford to fight back. And when she loses, she's going to pay. We'll countersue for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages will more than cover Mia's surgery. And if we don't win? David met his eyes. Then you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you told the truth, which is worth something, even if it's not worth $400,000. The Davidson County Courthouse was a concrete monument to bureaucratic architecture, all harsh angles and tinted windows that turned the Tennessee sun into something cold and institutional. Evan followed David through security, hyper-aware of the cameras following their movement. News vans lined the street outside, reporters doing stand-ups with the courthouse steps as their backdrop. Jenny had warned him that the hearing was technically open to the public, which meant the gallery would be packed with journalists, industry observers, and people with nothing better to do than watch a janitor fight a superstar. The courtroom was smaller than Evan expected, with wooden benches that creaked and fluorescent lights that buzzed. Harper was already seated at the plaintiff's table with her legal team. 4 attorneys in expensive suits, all of them projecting the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a case they cared about. Harper herself wore a navy dress that probably cost more than Evan's truck, her blonde hair pulled back in a style that managed to look both professional and sympathetic. She didn't look at him as he entered. Richard Voss stood when the judge entered. Judge Patricia Martinez was in her 50s, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she'd heard every possible variation of bullshit and remained unimpressed by all of it. She settled into her chair and reviewed the case file in front of her. This is an emergency hearing on the plaintiff's motion for a temporary restraining order and psychiatric evaluation, Judge Martinez said without preamble. Mr. Voss, you have 30 minutes to convince me why I should restrict Mr. Brooks's First Amendment rights. Make it count. Voss stood smoothly, his movements practiced. Your Honor, thank you. This case concerns a pattern of defamatory statements made by the defendant, Evan Brooks, against my client, Harper Weston. Mr. Brooks, who was employed as a janitor at the venue where Miss Weston was performing at a charitable event, used the platform of that event to make false and malicious claims about her artistic abilities and professional integrity. He clicked a remote, and a screen descended behind the judge's bench. Video footage began to play, the moment from the gala. Evan watching it now, from the outside, understanding how it must have looked to people who didn't know the context. His accusations, Harper's failed attempt at the note, the chaos that followed. Mr. Brooks claimed in front of 500 witnesses and millions of online viewers that Ms. Weston has been using pre-recorded vocals to fake her signature high note. This claim, made without evidence and without expertise, has caused catastrophic damage to my client's reputation and livelihood. Within 24 hours of Mr. Brooks's statements, Ms. Weston lost 3 major endorsement deals worth a combined $12 million. Her concert tour, which was set to begin next month, is now in jeopardy as venues reconsider their contracts. And the charitable foundation she founded, which has raised over $50 million for sick children, is facing donor demands for refunds and investigations into its financial practices. Voss paused, letting the numbers sink in. Evan felt the weight of every gaze in the courtroom. But the damage goes beyond financial, Voss continued. Ms. Weston has received death threats. She's been harassed on social media by thousands of people calling her a fraud and a liar. She's been forced to hire additional security because of concerns for her physical safety. All because Mr. Brooks decided to use a charity event as a platform for his personal vendetta. Personal vendetta? Judge Martinez looked up from her notes. What's the basis for that characterization? Mr. Brooks is a failed musician, Your Honor. 7 years ago, he was a contestant on a televised singing competition. He was eliminated in the early rounds and subsequently left the industry. There's a clear pattern here of a bitter individual unable to accept his own lack of success, lashing out at someone who achieved everything he wanted. David was on his feet. Objection. That's not evidence. That's speculation about my client's mental state. I'm establishing context, Your Honor, Voss said smoothly. Context that becomes relevant when we discuss our request for a psychiatric evaluation. Mr. Brooks's behavior at the gala was erratic and aggressive. He physically confronted Ms. Weston on stage. He made accusations without evidence, and when given the opportunity to resolve this matter privately, he refused and instead escalated by releasing a lengthy statement to the press containing additional defamatory claims. Voss clicked his remote again. Screenshots appeared on the screen, Evan's social media posts from that morning. The statement he'd written in Mia's hospital room, laying out everything he knew about Harper's vocal deception and the Children's Hope Foundation's financial practices. This is not the behavior of a rational individual seeking justice, Voss said. This is the behavior of someone experiencing a mental health crisis. And Your Honor, we have concerns about Mr. Brooks's daughter. He's raising a 9-year-old child with serious medical needs while exhibiting increasingly unstable behavior. We believe a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation is necessary not just to assess Mr. Brooks's competency in this legal matter, but to ensure the safety and well-being of his daughter. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Judge Martinez's gavel came down hard. Quiet, or I'll clear this courtroom. She looked at Voss. Counselor, you're asking me to order a psych eval on a father based on the fact that he made public accusations against your client. That's a significant overreach unless you have evidence of actual mental instability or danger. We have evidence that Mr. Brooks has made increasingly paranoid statements about Ms. Weston and the charitable foundation. He's claimed, without proof, that the foundation is engaged in financial fraud. He suggested that Ms. Weston deliberately exploited his daughter's illness for publicity. He's constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory about the music industry suppressing the truth about Ms. Weston's abilities. Voss's voice took on a tone of concerned reasonableness. Your Honor, these are not the statements of someone thinking clearly. They're the statements of someone who needs help. Judge Martinez turned to David. Mr. Park, I assume you have a response to this characterization of your client as mentally unstable? I do, Your Honor. David stood and buttoned his jacket. But first, I'd like to note that opposing counsel has spent 20 minutes talking about damages and mental health without addressing the central question. Are Mr. Brooks's statements true? Because if they're true, they're not defamatory. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, as Mr. Voss well knows. We dispute that any of Mr. Brooks's statements are true, Voss interjected. Then let's test that dispute right now. David gestured to the gallery. Your Honor, I have a witness present who can provide direct evidence about the claims Mr. Brooks made. I'd like to call Melissa Torres to testify. Voss was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is an emergency hearing on a motion for temporary relief. It's not a full trial on the merits. Witness testimony is not appropriate at this stage. Witness testimony is absolutely appropriate when determining whether to restrict someone's constitutional rights, David shot back. You want to silence my client by claiming he's making false statements. I want to prove his statements are true. Let the witness testify, and then Your Honor can make an informed decision about whether Mr. Brooks should be gagged and psychiatrically evaluated for telling the truth. Judge Martinez considered this. I'll allow brief testimony limited to the specific claims Mr. Brooks made about the vocal recording. Ms. Torres, please approach the witness stand. Melissa Torres walked from the gallery with the kind of composure that came from years of performing under pressure. She was in her mid-40s, with dark hair and a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. After she was sworn in, David approached the witness stand. Ms. Torres, please tell the court your professional background. I'm a session vocalist. I've worked in the music industry for 22 years, providing vocals for recordings, commercials, and live performances. My work has appeared on over 300 released tracks, though most of the time I'm not credited by name. And have you ever worked with Harper Weston? Yes. In March of 2016, I was hired by Ms. Weston's production team to record vocals for her single, Hold On. The courtroom went silent. Harper's face remained impassive, but Evan saw her attorney lean over and whisper something urgent in her ear. What specifically were you hired to record? David asked. The bridge section, specifically the high note, an E6 that Ms. Weston wanted in the final recording but couldn't hit herself. How do you know she couldn't hit it herself? Because I was present during her recording sessions. She attempted the note approximately 30 times over 2 days. She couldn't reach the pitch consistently, and when she did reach it, the tone was strained and the sustain was insufficient. Her vocal coach, Richard Martinez, told the producer that Miss Weston's natural range topped out around D6, and that expecting her to reliably hit an E6 was unrealistic. Voss stood. Your Honor, I object to this entire line of testimony. Ms. Torres has produced no documentation to support these claims. This is hearsay at best and fabrication at worst. Actually, David said, pulling a flash drive from his pocket, Ms. Torres brought the original session files, complete with timestamps, frequency analysis, and metadata showing that the vocal in the final released version of Hold On is Ms. Torres's voice, not Ms. Weston's. I'd like to submit this as evidence. Judge Martinez extended her hand. I'll review it. Continue your examination, Mr. Park. Ms. Torres, how much were you paid for recording this vocal? $3,000. And I was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that I would never reveal my involvement in the recording or discuss any aspect of Ms. Weston's vocal abilities. Did you understand why the NDA was necessary? I understood that Ms. Weston's entire brand was built on being an exceptional vocalist. If the public knew that her signature note, the note that won her a Grammy, that made her famous, wasn't actually her voice, it would destroy her credibility. The NDA protected that secret. And why are you violating that NDA now? Melissa looked directly at Harper for the first time. Because I'm tired of watching someone else get credit for my work. And because I read about Evan Brooks and his daughter, and I realized that Harper was using that little girl's illness to raise money for a foundation that barely helps anyone. I decided that the truth was more important than protecting Harper's lie. The gallery exploded again. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. Someone in the back was recording despite the no recording signs posted throughout the courtroom. Judge Martinez's gavel came down repeatedly. One more outburst and this courtroom will be cleared, she said sharply. Then to Voss. Counselor, I assume you want to cross-examine this witness? Voss approached the stand, his expression carefully neutral. Ms. Torres, you signed an NDA, correct? Yes. And you understood that violating that NDA would expose you to legal liability? Yes. So you're willing to face potential financial ruin in order to support Mr. Brooks's accusations against Miss Weston? I'm willing to face legal consequences in order to tell the truth. Or perhaps you're motivated by the same thing Mr. Brooks is motivated by, resentment about your own career. You've been a session vocalist for 22 years, largely uncredited and unknown. Isn't it true that you've been bitter about not receiving recognition for your work? I've been frustrated by the industry practice of using vocalists like me without credit, yes, but that frustration doesn't make my testimony false, doesn't it? You're testifying against a former client, violating a contract you freely signed, making claims that, if proven false, would constitute defamation on your part as well. Voss's voice hardened. Ms. Torres, how much is Mr. Brooks paying you to testify today? Nothing. I'm here because it's the right thing to do. How convenient. And these session files you've provided, how do we know they're authentic? How do we know you didn't fabricate them in order to support this narrative? The metadata is embedded in the files themselves. Any audio forensic specialist can verify their authenticity. We'll certainly have our experts examine them thoroughly. Voss turned to the judge. Your Honor, I renew my objection to this testimony. Ms. Torres has a clear bias and motive to lie. Her testimony should not be considered in determining whether to grant our motion. Judge Martinez had been examining the files on the flash drive using her laptop. She looked up, her expression unreadable. Mr. Voss, I've reviewed the documentation Ms. Torres provided. The session files include unedited master recordings, contractual documents with Ms. Weston's signature, and payment records showing transactions from Ms. Weston's production company to Ms. Torres. Unless your client is prepared to claim these documents are forgeries, which would itself constitute a serious allegation, I find Ms. Torres's testimony credible. Harper's face went pale. Her attorneys were conferring urgently, passing papers back and forth. Your Honor, Voss began, but Judge Martinez held up her hand. I'm not finished. Mr. Brooks made specific claims about Ms. Weston using pre-recorded vocals that were not her own. Based on the evidence presented today, those claims appear to be substantially true. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Therefore, I'm denying the motion for a temporary restraining order. Mr. Brooks retains his right to speak about this matter publicly. The gallery erupted in cheers and shouts. Evan felt David's hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Furthermore, Judge Martinez continued, raising her voice over the noise, I'm denying the motion for psychiatric evaluation. Using the legal system to intimidate someone into silence by threatening their parental rights is an abusive process. Mr. Voss, your client should be very careful about her next steps. If she continues to pursue this defamation claim when the evidence suggests Mr. Brooks's statements were truthful, she may find herself facing sanctions. Voss was pale now too. Your Honor, we request a continuance to review this new evidence and consult with our client about. Motion denied. This hearing is concluded. The gavel came down with finality. Evan couldn't move. His legs felt like water. David was pulling him toward the exit as reporters surged forward, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Melissa Torres appeared beside them, and Jenny materialized from somewhere to run interference, her purple hair and fierce expression parting the crowd like a weapon. They made it to David's car, a battered Honda that looked like it had survived multiple lifetimes, and collapsed inside. David pulled into traffic without speaking, navigating away from the courthouse toward his office. Finally, when they were clear of the immediate chaos, he looked at Evan in the rearview mirror. You just won the first battle. Harper's legal team is going to regroup and come at this from a different angle, but you broke their primary weapon. They can't silence you. They can't force a psych eval. And most importantly, the evidence is now part of the public record. Every news outlet in the country has access to those session files. Evan's phone was vibrating constantly with calls and texts. He scrolled through them, his eyes catching on one message in particular. From an unknown number. This is Marcus Chen. I need to talk to you. I'm ready to tell the real story. He showed David, who smiled grimly. The rats are leaving the ship. When people see that others are coming forward without consequences, they get brave. By tomorrow, you'll have a dozen more witnesses willing to testify about Harper's practices. Will it be enough to win a countersuit? Enough to get damages that would cover Mia's surgery? It's enough to start building a case that will terrify Harper's team into settling. Because here's what they're realizing right now. This isn't just about one note anymore. You've opened an investigation into her entire operation, the foundation, the financial practices, the intimidation of former employees and collaborators. Every piece of it is going to be examined under a microscope, and what we find is going to be ugly. Melissa spoke from the front passenger seat, her voice tired. Harper will try to buy her way out. She'll offer settlements to everyone who might testify. She'll pay millions to make this go away quietly. Then we make sure it doesn't go away quietly, David replied. We file the countersuit before she has a chance to negotiate individual settlements. We go public with every piece of evidence we find. We make this so big and so loud that Harper can't contain it with money. They arrived back at David's office to find the small waiting area packed with people. Jenny was taking names and contact information, her expression overwhelmed. "They're all witnesses," she said when David entered. "Session musicians, backing vocalists, former employees of the foundation, they all want to testify." David looked at Evan. "This is what happens when someone finally stands up. Everyone who was afraid suddenly finds their courage." Evan spent the next 4 hours in David's office, giving his statement while David took notes and Jenny organized the waiting witnesses into some kind of manageable schedule. Around 3 in the afternoon, Evan's phone rang. St. Thomas Hospital again. "Mr. Brooks, this is Carol. Mia's asking for you. Her numbers are stable, but she's very anxious about everything happening in the news. Dr. Chen thinks it would be good if you came in." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He told David he had to go. David nodded and handed him a business card for a publicist. "Call her. Her name is Angela Price, and she specializes in crisis communications. She'll help you manage the media attention and make sure your story gets told the way it needs to be told. She works on contingency for cases like this. She doesn't get paid unless you win." Evan took the card and headed for the parking garage. His truck felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the day. He drove to the hospital on autopilot, his mind spinning through everything that had happened. Judge Martinez's ruling. Melissa's testimony. The session file's now part of the public record, Marcus Chen wanting to come forward again. The hospital parking garage was busier than usual. Evan found a spot on the 4th level and took the elevator down, his exhaustion hitting him now that the adrenaline was fading. He walked through the familiar corridors to Mia's room, nodding to nurses who'd become friends over the past 3 years. Mia's room was dark except for the glow of the television. She was propped up on pillows, her oxygen cannula in place, watching the news. When Evan entered, she muted the volume. "Daddy, you won." He sat down beside her bed. "We won one hearing, sweetheart. There's still a lot more to do." "But the judge said you were telling the truth, and that lady who sang the note said you were right." Mia's eyes were bright with something Evan hadn't seen in months, hope mixed with pride. "You're famous now, like really famous." "Fame isn't what matters." "I know, truth matters. Mom taught me that." Mia reached for his hand. "Are we going to be okay?" It was the question Evan had been asking himself for 3 years, the question that kept him awake at night and drove him to work multiple jobs and made him calculate medical costs in his sleep. And for the first time since Sarah died, he thought he might have an answer. "Yes," he said, "I think we are." Mia smiled and closed her eyes, settling back into her pillows. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep. Evan sat there holding her hand, watching her chest rise and fall with the help of oxygen she shouldn't need, and thought about all the ways the world tried to silence ordinary people when they spoke truth to power. His phone buzzed with a text from Angela Price, the publicist David had recommended. "I've been following your case. I want to help. Call me when you're ready to tell your story the right way." Another text, this one from an unknown number. "Mr. Brooks, this is Amanda Chen from the New York Times. I'd like to interview you for a feature article about your case and the broader issues of fraud and exploitation in the charity sector. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." A third text from David. "Harper's team just filed a motion to seal the court records from today's hearing. They're trying to bury Melissa's testimony. We'll fight it, but thought you should know." Evan looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully despite the machines and the uncertainty and the reality that without significant money soon, her heart would fail. He thought about Sarah, who'd taught her students that speaking up was worth the risk, even when the risk was everything. And he thought about the moment on that stage when he'd decided that some truths were too important to leave unspoken, even when staying silent would have been so much easier. His phone rang one more time, a Nashville area code he didn't recognize. Evan answered it quietly. "Mr. Brooks, this is James Morrison. I'm a cardiologist at Vanderbilt Medical Center. I saw your story on the news, and I'd like to discuss Mia's case. I have some thoughts about alternative funding sources and treatment options that might help." Evan's throat tightened. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. But Mr. Brooks, what you did today, standing up to someone with that much power, that takes courage most people don't have. The least I can do is try to help your daughter." After the call ended, Evan sat in the darkening room and let himself feel something he'd been afraid to feel for months. Not just hope, but belief. Belief that sometimes, when you spoke truth loudly enough, people listened. And some of those people had the power to help. Outside Mia's window, Nashville's lights were beginning to glow against the twilight sky. Somewhere in that city, Harper Weston was probably strategizing with her attorneys, trying to contain the damage Evan had done to her empire. Somewhere, reporters were writing stories that would reach millions. Somewhere, other people who'd been silenced were finding their voices. And here, in this hospital room, a father sat beside his sleeping daughter and believed, for the first time in a very long time, that they were going to survive this. Not just survive, win. The belief lasted exactly 16 hours before Harper's counterattack began. Evan was in Mia's room the next morning, helping her with breakfast while she watched cartoons, when his phone lit up with an alert from a news site. The headline made his blood run cold. Harper Weston files $50 million lawsuit against Janitor, citing orchestrated defamation campaign. He clicked through to the article with shaking hands. Harper's new legal strategy wasn't subtle, it was overwhelming. The lawsuit claimed that Evan had conspired with Melissa Torres and David Park to manufacture evidence and destroy Harper's reputation as part of a coordinated extortion scheme. It alleged that the session files Melissa provided were forgeries, that her testimony was perjury, and that Evan had specifically targeted Harper because he knew she was vulnerable after her recent charitable work. But the truly devastating part came 3 paragraphs down. Harper's team had hired a private investigator who dug into Evan's past, and they'd found something Evan had hoped would stay buried forever. The article included a police report from 6 years ago, 2 months after Sarah died, when a neighbor had called the cops after hearing Evan shouting at 3 in the morning. The responding officers had found him drunk, alone, punching holes in the walls of their apartment while infant Mia screamed in her crib. No charges had been filed. Child Services had conducted a welfare check and closed the case after determining it was a one-time incident during a mental health crisis. But now Harper's attorneys were using it as evidence that Evan was unstable, potentially dangerous, and unfit to have custody of his daughter. "Mr. Brooks?" Carol stood in the doorway, her expression troubled. "There's someone from Child Protective Services here. They need to speak with you." Evan's world tilted. He looked at Mia, who'd stopped eating and was watching him with worried eyes. He forced his voice to stay calm. "Okay, can you stay with Mia while I talk to them?" "Of course." The CPS caseworker was a woman in her 30s named Patricia Williams. She met Evan in a private consultation room down the hall, her face professionally neutral as she opened a folder on the table between them. "Mr. Brooks, I'm here because we received a complaint regarding Mia's welfare. The complaint alleges that you've been exhibiting erratic behavior, that you've made reckless decisions that jeopardized your daughter's medical care, and that you have a history of violence and substance abuse." Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. "I need to ask you some questions. The complaint came from Harper Weston's legal team. The source of the complaint doesn't change my obligation to investigate." She pulled out a copy of the police report from 6 years ago. "Can you tell me about this incident?" Evan's hands clenched under the table. "My wife had died 8 weeks earlier. I was drowning in medical debt and grief. I had a breakdown one night after Mia finally fell asleep. I was drunk and I put my fist through the drywall. It was the worst moment of my life, and I got help immediately after. I haven't touched alcohol since that night. I've been in therapy. I've done everything right for 6 years. And the recent events? The confrontation with Ms. Weston at a public event? The lawsuit? The media attention? How is all of this affecting Mia?" "It's stressful. Of course it's stressful. But Mia understands why I did what I did. She knows I was standing up for the truth." Patricia made notes in her file. "Mr. Brooks, I'm going to be direct with you. The complaint also alleges that you refused a settlement offer that would have paid for Mia's surgery because you were more interested in pursuing your vendetta against Ms. Weston than in securing your daughter's medical care. Is that accurate?" The question felt like a physical blow. "I refused the settlement because it required me to publicly call myself a liar. It required me to help Harper cover up fraud and exploitation. I couldn't do that. Even though refusing it meant your daughter might not get the surgery she needs? I'm working on other options. I have lawyers helping me. You have lawyers helping you sue Harper Weston for damages you might collect months or years from now. Meanwhile, Mia needs surgery within 2 weeks. Patricia closed her folder. I'm not making any determinations today, but I am opening a formal investigation into Mia's living situation and your ability to make decisions in her best interest. I'll be conducting interviews with hospital staff, reviewing her medical records, and speaking with Mia herself. You'll be notified of my findings within 10 business days. You can't take her away from me. She's all I have left. I'm not taking anyone away from anyone, Mr. Brooks. I'm doing my job, which is ensuring that Mia is safe and that her needs are being met. Patricia stood. I'd like to speak with her now, if that's all right. Evan wanted to refuse, wanted to grab Mia and run, to get in his truck and drive until they crossed a state line, until they were somewhere Harper's money and lawyers couldn't reach them. But he was trapped by the same system that was supposed to protect children like Mia. If he refused to cooperate, it would only make things worse. Okay, he said quietly, but I want to be present when you talk to her. That's not how this works. I need to interview her privately to ensure she can speak freely. Evan walked back to Mia's room, feeling like he was moving through water. Carol was reading to Mia from one of her favorite books, the one about the girl who saved a kingdom with nothing but courage and cleverness. Mia looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her smile fade. Daddy? What's wrong? Nothing, sweetheart. This nice lady just needs to talk to you for a few minutes. Her name is Patricia, and she works for an agency that helps kids. You don't need to be scared. Just tell her the truth about everything, okay? Mia nodded slowly, her hand reaching for the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was born, the one Sarah had bought when they'd first learned they were pregnant. Patricia entered the room behind Evan, and Carol gently guided him toward the door. I'll stay right here in the hall, Evan said. If you need me, I'm right here. The next 20 minutes were among the longest of Evan's life. He stood outside the door, listening to the murmur of voices but unable to make out words. Other nurses passed by, some offering sympathetic looks, others carefully avoiding eye contact. David called twice, but Evan couldn't bring himself to answer. What was he supposed to say? That Harper had found a way to weaponize the legal system even more effectively than before? That she was using his worst moment against him? Finally, the door opened. Patricia emerged alone, her expression unreadable. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Brooks. I'll be in touch. She walked away without another word. Evan rushed into the room. Mia was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, her oxygen saturation dropping on the monitor. Carol was adjusting her supplemental oxygen flow while trying to soothe her. What did she ask you? Evan moved to Mia's side, taking her hand carefully. Sweetheart, what happened? She asked if I felt safe with you. Mia's voice was choked with tears. She asked if you ever scared me or hurt me or made me feel bad. She asked if I had enough food and if you took good care of me and if I wished I lived somewhere else. Her fingers gripped his hand desperately. I told her you were the best daddy in the whole world. I told her you take care of me even when you're tired and you never make me feel bad and I don't want to live anywhere else. Why did she ask me those things? It's just questions they have to ask, baby. It doesn't mean anything. But it did mean something. It meant Harper had found the one weapon that could destroy Evan more completely than any lawsuit or financial penalty. She was coming after Mia directly, using the system designed to protect children as a tool to separate them. Evan's phone rang. David this time, and Evan couldn't ignore it anymore. He stepped into the hallway to answer. They're trying to take Mia away from me. I know. Harper's team is playing every card they have. David's voice was tight with anger. But here's what they don't know. While they were filing their lawsuit and sicking CPS on you, we were building our countersuit. And we just got something that changes everything. What? Marcus Chen didn't just retract his statement because he was scared. He retracted it because Harper's team paid him $200,000 and promised to protect his career if he claimed he'd been coerced by you. We have the wire transfer. We have the emails negotiating the payment. We have proof that Harper's legal team engaged in witness tampering. Evan leaned against the wall, his legs suddenly weak. That's illegal. That's felony obstruction of justice. It's also proof of Harper's consciousness of guilt. She knew the allegations were true, so she paid someone to lie about them. This doesn't just win us the defamation case, this opens her up to criminal charges. Will it be enough to stop the CPS investigation? I'm working on that. But Evan, you need to understand something. Harper's terrified. The $50 million lawsuit, the CPS complaint, the private investigator digging into your past, that's all panic. She's throwing everything at you, hoping something will make you back down before the truth completely destroys her. I can't back down now, even if I wanted to. She's already escalated too far. Exactly, which means we escalate too. I'm filing the countersuit today. Malicious prosecution, abuse of process, witness tampering, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're asking for $50 million in compensatory damages and another $50 million in punitive damages. And we're filing a motion for expedited discovery so we can subpoena every record, every contract, every financial document related to Harper's career and her foundation. $100 million. Evan almost laughed. David, even if we won that, she'd appeal for years. Mia doesn't have years. Which is why we're also filing an emergency motion for preliminary injunctive relief. We're asking the court to order Harper to deposit funds into an escrow account sufficient to cover Mia's surgery while the case is pending. We'll argue that Harper's actions directly interfered with Mia's access to medical care and that she should be required to remedy that harm immediately. Will a judge grant that? Judge Martinez might, especially after we present evidence of witness tampering. She doesn't like people who abuse the legal system, and Harper just gave us proof that's exactly what she's doing. David paused. But I need you to be prepared for what comes next. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Harper's going to dig up every mistake you've ever made, every bad decision, every moment of weakness, every time you fell short of perfect, and she's going to use all of it to paint you as a villain. I'm not the villain. I know that, but we need 12 jurors to know that. Which means you need to be completely honest with me about everything in your past, anything that could be used against you, anything at all. Evan closed his eyes and thought about all the things he'd rather forget. The drinking after Sarah died, the depression that had made it hard to get out of bed for months, the times he'd fed Mia cereal for dinner because he was too exhausted to cook, the parent-teacher conferences he'd missed because he was working double shifts, the birthday parties he couldn't afford to throw, every way he'd fallen short of the father he wanted to be. I've made a lot of mistakes, he said quietly, but I've never stopped trying. I've never given up on her. That's what matters. That's what will show the jury. David's voice softened. Evan, you're not fighting this alone anymore. You've got me. You've got Melissa. You've got Marcus, who's ready to testify truthfully now that his payment from Harper's team is evidence. And you've got about 40 other witnesses who are coming forward with their own stories about Harper's practices. This isn't David versus Goliath anymore. This is an army against a liar. After the call ended, Evan returned to Mia's room. She'd calmed down, her oxygen saturation back to acceptable levels, though her eyes were still red from crying. Carol had put on a movie, one of the animated ones Mia loved, with singing animals and a message about believing in yourself. Daddy, Mia said quietly, am I going to have to go live with someone else? No, baby, you're staying right here with me. Promise? Evan wanted to promise, wanted to look his daughter in the eyes and swear that nothing would separate them. But Sarah had taught him that you didn't make promises you couldn't keep. And right now, with CPS investigating and Harper's lawyers working to paint him as unfit, he couldn't guarantee anything. I'm going to fight with everything I have to keep you safe, he said instead. That's the best promise I can make. Mia seemed to understand the distinction. She nodded and turned back to the movie, but her hand stayed wrapped around his, holding on like he might disappear if she let go. Evan's phone buzzed with a text from Angela Price, the publicist. I've been contacted by 3 major networks asking for interviews. Today Show, Good Morning America, and 60 Minutes. This is your chance to control the narrative. Are you ready? Another text from Dr. Morrison at Vanderbilt. I've consulted with colleagues about Mia's case. We may be able to offer the surgery at a reduced cost through our charity care program. Let's talk specifics. A third text from an unknown number. Mr. Brooks, this is Rachel Freeman. I'm a former employee of the Children's Hope Foundation. I have documentation showing that donations were routinely diverted to shell companies owned by Harper's family members. I'd like to provide this to your attorney. The messages kept coming. Witnesses, reporters, offers of help, expressions of support. The tide was turning, but Evan didn't know if it was turning fast enough. 2 days later, David filed the countersuit. The press conference he held on the courthouse steps drew dozens of reporters and camera crews. Evan stood beside him, feeling exposed and vulnerable in the bright autumn sunlight, while David laid out the case in stark terms. Harper Weston has spent 15 years building an empire on lies. She's lied about her talent, paying another singer to provide vocals she claimed as her own. She's lied about her charitable work, using sick children's faces to raise millions while distributing a tiny fraction to actual patient care. And when someone finally had the courage to expose those lies, she tried to destroy him using every tool at her disposal: lawsuits, private investigators, and even weaponizing Child Protective Services to threaten his custody of his daughter. But lies can't stand forever. Today, we're fighting back. The questions came rapid fire. Was Evan asking for $100 million? Did he really believe Harper would pay? What about the CPS investigation? What about the evidence Harper claimed proved the session files were forged? David handled each question with practiced precision, never getting defensive, always bringing the focus back to the core truth. Harper had built her career on fraud, and Evan had simply revealed what she'd been hiding. Evan himself only spoke once, when a reporter asked directly whether he regretted confronting Harper at the gala. "I regret that it was necessary," he said carefully. "I regret that we live in a world where someone can exploit sick children for publicity and profit for 15 years before anyone calls it out. But I don't regret telling the truth. My daughter is watching all of this, and I want her to learn that integrity matters more than comfort, that speaking up is worth the cost." That soundbite played on every news network for the next 48 hours. Harper's response came through her publicist, a carefully worded statement expressing disappointment that Mr. Brooks continued to spread false allegations despite overwhelming evidence of his own instability and questionable judgment. But Harper's team made a critical mistake. They held their own press conference, where Richard Voss, her lead attorney, spent 20 minutes attacking Evan's character and questioning his fitness as a parent. He referenced the 6-year-old police report, suggested that Evan was using his daughter's illness for sympathy and financial gain, and implied that the entire controversy was a manufactured attempt at extortion. The public response was immediate and brutal. Social media erupted with outrage at the idea of a millionaire celebrity and her expensive lawyers attacking a single father whose only crime was exposing fraud. The hashtag #IStandWithEvan trended globally within hours. Musicians started posting videos supporting Evan and sharing their own stories of industry exploitation. 3 of Harper's sponsors announced they were suspending their partnerships pending investigation. And then Marcus Chen held his own press conference, this time without retracting anything. With David beside him and his own attorney present, Marcus detailed exactly what had happened. Harper's team had threatened his career, offered him money, and pressured him into recanting his original statement. He provided copies of the emails, the wire transfer confirmation, and text messages that made it clear Harper's attorneys had known they were tampering with a witness. "I was scared," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've worked in this industry for 15 years, and I've seen what happens to people who cross the wrong person. But I'm more scared of living with myself if I keep lying. Evan Brooks told the truth, and I'm not going to let Harper Weston destroy him for it." That night, federal investigators announced they were opening an inquiry into potential witness tampering and obstruction of justice. The Tennessee Attorney General's office announced a separate investigation into the Children's Hope Foundation's financial practices. And the IRS issued a statement confirming they were reviewing the foundation's tax-exempt status. Harper's empire was collapsing in real time, and she knew it. The settlement offer came through David 48 hours after the countersuit was filed. Harper's attorneys wanted to negotiate a confidential resolution that would include a payment to cover Mia's surgery, plus additional compensation in exchange for Evan's silence and agreement to drop all claims. David called Evan at midnight to discuss the offer. "They're starting at $5 million, which means they'll probably go to 10 if we push." $10 million. Evan was sitting in the hospital parking garage, unable to sleep, unable to go home to the empty apartment where Sarah's absence still echoed in every room. That would cover Mia's surgery and secure her future. It would, but it would also let Harper walk away from everything she's done. The fraud, the exploitation, the witness tampering, all of it disappears behind a confidentiality agreement. What do you think I should do? That's not my decision, but I'll tell you what I think will happen if we don't settle. This case goes to trial in about 8 months. During those 8 months, Harper's team will make your life miserable. They'll depose everyone you've ever known. They'll scrutinize every aspect of your life. They'll try to prove you're an unfit father, a failed musician with a grudge, someone who cynically exploited his sick daughter for attention and money. The CPS investigation will continue. The media attention will be relentless. And there's no guarantee we win at trial, even with all the evidence we have. And if we do win? If we win, we get a judgment for potentially $100 million in damages. Harper appeals, which takes another 2 years minimum. During that time, she pays nothing. Eventually, after years of litigation, we might collect a fraction of the judgment, or she might declare bankruptcy and we get nothing. Evan looked up at the hospital windows, trying to identify which one was Mia's room. So the smart move is to take the settlement. David agreed. But I didn't get into this work to make smart moves. I got into it because I believe people like Harper shouldn't be able to buy their way out of consequences. So if you want to fight this all the way to trial, knowing it's going to be hell and might not pay off financially, I'll fight it with you. Evan thought about Mia asking him if he was going to fight the mean lady. Thought about her saying that her mother would be proud of him. Thought about all the other people who'd been silenced by Harper over the years, who were watching this case and hoping someone would finally hold her accountable. There's got to be a middle option, he said, something between total capitulation and years of litigation. There is. We counter their offer with conditions. Full payment for Mia's surgery deposited into escrow immediately, non-refundable. Additional payment of $5 million for damages, but no confidentiality agreement and no requirement that you recant your statements. Harper admits that her career included use of uncredited vocalists and agrees to credit Melissa Torres on all future releases of Hold On. The Children's Hope Foundation undergoes an independent audit and restructures its financial practices to ensure at least 70% of donations go directly to patient care, and Harper withdraws her defamation lawsuit and her CPS complaint. She'll never agree to that. The admission alone would destroy her remaining credibility. Then she doesn't agree and we go to trial. But we make the offer publicly so everyone knows we tried to resolve this reasonably. It puts pressure on her to accept or look like she's more interested in protecting her image than in resolving the harm she caused. Evan closed his eyes and made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Make the offer. But David, if she refuses, I need you to find a way to expedite this. Mia doesn't have 8 months. I'm already working on it. Judge Martinez hates delays, and we can argue that the medical urgency requires an accelerated timeline. I think I can get us a trial date within 3 months if necessary. 3 months. Still longer than Mia's current window, but better than 8. Evan would have to find a way to bridge the gap, borrow more money, beg Dr. Morrison for additional help, something. The settlement offer went out the next morning, accompanied by a press release from David's office outlining the terms. The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of Evan's position. Even some entertainment industry figures who'd previously stayed neutral began calling for Harper to accept responsibility and make amends. Harper's response came 36 hours later, delivered not through her attorneys but through a live interview on a major network morning show. She appeared perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her expression carefully calibrated to convey both strength and vulnerability. "I've made mistakes," she told the interviewer, her voice trembling slightly. "I've worked in an industry that sometimes prioritizes perfection over honesty. And yes, I use studio enhancement on some of my recordings, something that every major artist does, but that we don't always talk about publicly. I should have been more transparent about that. But the characterization that I've built my entire career on fraud, that I've exploited sick children, that I've done any of the terrible things I'm being accused of, that's simply not true." The interviewer leaned forward. "What about Melissa Torres? What about her testimony that she recorded the vocals you've claimed as your own?" Melissa is a talented vocalist who did provide some support vocals on Hold On. But the characterization that she sang my signature note while I lip-synced or pretended it was my voice, that's a gross distortion of standard recording practices. Every record you've ever heard uses multiple vocal takes, studio enhancement, and collaborative artistry. That's not fraud. That's how music gets made. And the allegations about the Children's Hope Foundation? Harper's eyes glistened with what might have been genuine tears. That foundation is my pride and joy. We've helped hundreds of families access medical care they couldn't afford. Are we perfect? No. Could we do better with our overhead costs and administrative efficiency? Absolutely, and we're already implementing changes. But to suggest that I've been exploiting sick children, that I used Mia Brooks's illness for publicity, is the cruelest thing anyone has ever said about me. It was a masterful performance. Harper acknowledged just enough fault to seem reasonable while rejecting the core allegations as misunderstandings or distortions. She positioned herself as imperfect but well-meaning, a victim of an industry that demanded perfection and a legal system that allowed character assassination. The interview might have worked if not for what happened next. During the commercial break, someone leaked an audio recording to multiple news outlets simultaneously. It was Harper's voice, clearly identifiable, speaking to someone identified in the metadata as her business manager. "I don't care what it costs," Harper was saying. "Find everything on this guy, every bad decision, every weakness, every skeleton in his closet. And if you can't find enough, manufacture something. I want him destroyed so thoroughly that no one will ever believe another word he says." The timestamp on the recording was from 2 days after the gala, before Harper had filed her defamation lawsuit, before the CPS complaint, before any of her team's public statements about wanting to resolve this reasonably. The audio played on repeat across every platform. Harper's carefully constructed image of a wounded innocent crumbled. Her morning show interview became Exhibit A in the case against her, evidence that she was still lying, still manipulating, still using every tool available to silence someone who'd exposed her fraud. Evan was in Mia's room when the audio broke. His phone lit up with messages faster than he could read them. David called, his voice electric with triumph. "She's finished. That recording proves malicious intent, proves she knowingly tried to destroy you, proves everything we've been arguing. Her attorneys are going to advise her to settle immediately because if this goes to trial, she's going to lose spectacularly." Where did the recording come from? I don't know, and I don't care. Maybe a former employee with a conscience. Maybe someone on her team who got tired of being part of her machine. What matters is that it's authenticated and it's damning. Within 3 hours, Harper's team contacted David to accept the settlement terms. All of them. Immediate payment for Mia's surgery, $5 million in damages, admission of uncredited vocalists, foundation restructuring, withdrawal of the defamation suit and CPS complaint. The only negotiation was about the exact wording of Harper's public admission, but even that fight was brief. Harper's position had become untenable, and everyone knew it. The paperwork took 2 days to finalize. Evan spent those days in a strange state of suspension, unable to fully believe it was real until he saw the escrow confirmation showing that $847,000 had been deposited to cover Mia's surgery. When the confirmation finally came through, he sat down in the chair beside Mia's bed and cried. Great heaving sobs that he'd been holding back for 3 years. Mia watched him with wide eyes. "Daddy, are those happy tears or sad tears?" "Happy tears, baby. The happiest tears I've ever cried. You're going to get your surgery. You're going to get better." Dr. Chen scheduled the procedure for the following week. The surgery would take 8 hours, followed by at least 2 weeks in intensive care and months of recovery. But the prognosis was good, better than good. With intervention now, before permanent damage occurred, Mia had an excellent chance of living a normal, healthy life. The night before the surgery, Evan sat beside Mia's bed reading her favorite book for the 100th time. She knew all the words by heart, but she still listened intently, her small hand wrapped around his finger. "Daddy," she said when he finished, "when I get better, will you sing again, like you did on the stage?" "Maybe, probably, if you want me to." "I want you to. Not because you're famous or because people are watching. Just because singing makes you happy. You used to sing all the time before Mom died. I remember that." Evan's throat tightened. You were so little. I remember. You sang to Mom when she was sick. You sang to me when I couldn't sleep. You stopped after she died, and I missed it. I stopped because it hurt too much. It reminded me of everything we lost. But maybe now it can remind you of what we still have, Mia said with the wisdom of someone far older than 9. That's what Mom would say. And she was right. Sarah would have said exactly that. She would have told Evan that grief couldn't be allowed to steal joy, that honoring the dead meant living fully, not hiding from everything that brought pleasure. Okay, Evan said. When you wake up after surgery, I'll sing to you. I'll sing until you tell me to stop. Mia smiled and closed her eyes, settling into sleep with the easy confidence of a child who believed her father could protect her from anything. And for the first time in 3 years, Evan thought maybe he could. Not by being perfect, not by never making mistakes, but by refusing to let fear or poverty or powerful people silence him when silence would let injustice continue. The surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. Evan spent the night in Mia's room, dozing fitfully in the chair that had become almost as familiar as his own bed. When the nurses came to prep her in the pre-dawn darkness, Mia was calm, almost serene. I'm not scared, she told Dr. Chen as they wheeled her toward the operating room. My daddy fought for me. Now you get to fix me. Evan walked beside the gurney as far as they'd let him go, holding Mia's hand until they reached the doors marked authorized personnel only. He kissed her forehead and whispered that he loved her, that he'd be right there when she woke up, that everything was going to be okay. Then the doors closed and she was gone. And Evan was left standing in an empty corridor with nothing to do but wait and hope and believe that the fight had been worth it. 8 hours later, Dr. Chen emerged from the operating room still in her surgical scrubs, her mask pulled down around her neck. Her expression told Evan everything he needed to know before she spoke. The surgery went perfectly. We repaired the valve, reinforced the surrounding tissue, and her heart is responding beautifully. She's going to be in intensive care for a while, but Mr. Brooks, your daughter is going to be fine. She's going to have a normal, healthy life. Evan's knees buckled. He caught himself against the wall, and Dr. Chen steadied him with a firm hand on his shoulder. She's going to be fine, Dr. Chen repeated. You did this. You fought for her, and you won. Evan stood outside the intensive care unit for 20 minutes before they'd let him see her, his legs still unsteady, his mind trying to process what Dr. Chen had said. Mia was going to be fine. After 3 years of declining health and impossible choices and nights spent calculating costs he couldn't afford, his daughter was going to live a normal life. The weight of that reality was almost too much to carry. When they finally allowed him into the ICU, Mia looked impossibly small, surrounded by machines and monitors. A ventilator breathed for her, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. IV lines ran from both arms. Electrodes tracked her heart rhythm on screens that blinked and beeped with reassuring regularity. But beneath all the medical apparatus, Evan could see what mattered most. Her color was better. Her oxygen saturation steady at 98% without supplemental support beyond the ventilator, her heart tracing a strong, regular pattern across the monitor. She'll be on the ventilator for another 12 hours, the ICU nurse explained quietly. Then we'll try to extubate her if everything stays stable. You can talk to her even though she's sedated. Studies show patients can hear familiar voices, and it helps with recovery. Evan pulled a chair close to the bed and took Mia's hand carefully, mindful of the IV port. Her fingers were warm, her pulse strong beneath his touch. He thought about all the times he'd sat exactly like this over the past 3 years, holding her hand and wondering how much time they had left. Now, instead of counting down to loss, he was counting forward to life. Hey, baby girl, he said softly. You did it. Dr. Chen says the surgery went perfectly. Your heart is fixed, and when you wake up, everything is going to be different, better. You're going to be able to run and play and not get tired. You're going to be able to do all the things we've been dreaming about. His voice caught. And I'm going to sing to you, just like I promised. He stayed there for 6 hours, leaving only when the nurses insisted he needed to eat something. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon, the lunch rush long over. Evan bought coffee and a sandwich he didn't taste, his mind still back in the ICU. His phone buzzed constantly with messages. David updating him on the settlement paperwork, Angela asking about scheduling interviews now that Mia's surgery was complete, reporters requesting statements, and dozens of messages from strangers offering support and sharing their own stories of fighting systems that seemed impossible to beat. One message stood out from the rest. It was from Marcus Chen, Harper's former sound engineer. "I heard about Mia's surgery. I'm so glad she's okay. What you did, standing up when everyone else stayed quiet, it gave me permission to do the same. Thank you for that." Evan replied simply, "Thank you for telling the truth when it mattered." His phone rang, David's name on the screen. Evan answered, expecting another update about legal paperwork. "Turn on the news," David said without preamble. "Any channel? Harper's holding another press conference." Evan found a television in the cafeteria waiting area and switched to a news network. Harper stood at a podium, looking diminished somehow despite her expensive clothes and professional styling. The confidence she'd always projected was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine defeat. "I'm here today to take full responsibility for my actions," Harper was saying, reading from prepared remarks but her voice unsteady. "I built my career on a foundation that was not entirely honest. I used the talent of other vocalists without giving them proper credit. I allowed people to believe things about my abilities that weren't completely true. And when someone had the courage to expose those lies, I tried to destroy him rather than accepting accountability. The cameras flashed constantly. Reporters shifted in their seats, sensing something unprecedented happening. Evan Brooks did nothing wrong. He told the truth, and I tried to punish him for it using every weapon at my disposal. Lawyers, private investigators, even the child welfare system. I abused the legal process. I intimidated witnesses. I put an innocent man and his sick daughter through hell because I was more concerned with protecting my image than with being honest." Harper looked directly into the camera. "Evan, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you and to Mia. You deserved better. Everyone I lied to over the years deserved better." She paused, visibly gathering herself. "Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from my music career. I'm dissolving the Children's Hope Foundation and working with independent auditors to ensure that every dollar currently in that organization goes directly to patient care. I'm also establishing a new fund, independent of me, that will support families facing medical costs they can't afford. The fund will be seeded with $10 million of my own money, and it will be managed by a board that doesn't include me or anyone connected to my business interests." The press conference continued for another 15 minutes, with Harper answering questions with a level of honesty that seemed to surprise even the journalists asking them. Yes, she'd known for years that her signature note wasn't entirely her own. Yes, she'd allowed the foundation to operate with excessive overhead costs. Yes, she'd tried to silence people who knew the truth. By the time she finished, Harper Weston's career was effectively over, but she'd at least managed to end it with something resembling integrity. "She didn't have to do that," Evan said to David over the phone. "The settlement didn't require a public confession like that." "No, but her lawyers probably advised it. Get ahead of the criminal investigation by showing remorse. Make herself less of a target for federal prosecutors by cooperating and making amends." David paused. "But honestly, I think part of it might be genuine. I think carrying that lie for 15 years wore her down, and having it exposed was almost a relief." "I'm supposed to feel sorry for her?" "You're supposed to feel however you feel. But Evan, you won. Not just the lawsuit, not just the settlement. You won the bigger fight. You proved that ordinary people can hold powerful ones accountable. That truth matters more than money, that speaking up is worth the risk." David's voice softened. "Your daughter is going to grow up knowing that her father had the courage to fight for what was right, even when it was terrifying. That's worth more than any settlement." After the call ended, Evan sat in the empty waiting area and thought about Sarah. She would have been proud of him, yes, but she also would have reminded him that the fight wasn't really about him. It was about all the people who'd been silenced before, all the families who'd been exploited by performative charity, all the artists whose work had been stolen and uncredited. Evan had just been the one who refused to stay quiet, and in doing so, he'd created space for others to speak their truth too. When he returned to the ICU, Mia was starting to wake up. The sedation was wearing off, and her eyes were fluttering open. The ICU nurse was already there, checking her vitals and preparing to remove the ventilator. "She's doing beautifully," the nurse said. strong enough to breathe on her own. Dr. Chen will be here in a few minutes to extubate her. Evan moved to Mia's side and took her hand. Her fingers squeezed his weakly, and her eyes found his face. He could see the question there, the fear that something had gone wrong. "You're okay," he said immediately. "The surgery worked perfectly. Your heart is fixed, baby. You're going to be okay." Tears leaked from the corners of Mia's eyes, running down into her hair. Evan wiped them away gently, careful not to disturb any of the equipment. "I know it's uncomfortable. They're going to take the breathing tube out soon, and then you'll be able to talk. But right now, you just need to rest and let your body heal." Dr. Chen arrived and assessed Mia's readiness for extubation. Within minutes, the ventilator was removed, and Mia was breathing on her own, really on her own, without the labored effort that had marked every breath for the past year. Her oxygen saturation held steady at 97%. Her heart rate was strong and regular. Everything was working the way it was supposed to work. "Daddy," Mia whispered, her voice hoarse from the tube, "did you win?" "We won, sweetheart. We won everything." "Is the mean lady still mean?" Evan thought about Harper's press conference, about the public confession, and the dissolution of her foundation and the $10 million she'd committed to helping other families. "I think she's trying to be better. That's all anyone can do when they've made mistakes. Try to be better." Mia's eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion pulling her back toward sleep. But before she went under, she whispered, "You promised to sing when I woke up." So Evan sang. Quietly, so as not to disturb the other ICU patients, he sang the lullaby Sarah used to sing to Mia when she was a baby. His voice was rusty from disuse, cracking on the higher notes, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the promise kept, the connection maintained, the life they were going to get to continue living together. The ICU nurse smiled at him from across the room. "You've got a beautiful voice. I used to do this professionally, a long time ago. Maybe you should do it again. The world needs more beauty, especially after everything you've been through." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hospital routines and gradual improvement. Mia moved from ICU to the regular cardiac floor after 3 days. Her chest tubes came out, her pain medication was reduced. The incision across her sternum began to heal, leaving a scar that would fade but never completely disappear, a permanent reminder of what she'd survived. Visitors came and went. David stopped by with updates on the settlement distribution and news that the federal investigation into Harper's business practices was expanding. Melissa Torres visited with flowers and a card signed by dozens of session musicians thanking Evan for exposing an industry practice that had exploited them for years. Dr. Reeves, reinstated after the hospital board reversed their decision under public pressure, came by to check on Mia's progress and tell Evan he'd always believed they'd get through this. Angela Price, the publicist, arranged for Evan to do a handful of carefully selected interviews. He appeared on morning shows and news programs, telling his story not as a victim, but as someone who'd simply refused to accept that powerful people got to write their own truth. The interviews went viral, spawning countless think pieces about power dynamics, industry fraud, and the importance of speaking up even when silence seemed safer. But the interview that mattered most to Evan was the one he did with a small nonprofit organization that helped families navigate pediatric medical crises. He talked about the impossible choices he'd faced, the systems that had failed them, and the moment when he'd decided that protecting his integrity was more important than protecting himself from consequences. The interview was shared millions of times, and within a week, the nonprofit had received enough donations to help 50 families access care they couldn't afford. "You started something," Angela told him during a phone call. "People are paying attention now to how charitable foundations actually operate. Congress is talking about requiring transparency in overhead costs. The IRS is reviewing tax-exempt status for organizations with excessive administrative expenses. You didn't just win your case, you changed the system." Evan wasn't sure about that. Systems were big and resistant to change. But if even a few families didn't have to go through what he'd gone through, if even a few sick children got the help they needed without their faces being exploited for publicity, then maybe it had been worth it. 3 weeks after the surgery, Dr. Chen cleared Mia for discharge. The morning they were supposed to leave, Evan packed up the room that had been their second home for months. carefully boxing the books and drawings and stuffed animals that had made the space feel less clinical. Mia sat on the edge of the bed, dressed in regular clothes for the first time in weeks, her color healthy and her breathing easy. "I can't believe we get to go home," she said, watching him pack. "I forgot what home looks like. It looks like an apartment that needs cleaning and a father who needs to figure out how to cook something besides cereal for dinner." Evan smiled at her. "But it's ours, and we're going to be there together." The discharge process took hours, paperwork and medication instructions, and follow-up appointment scheduling. But finally, a nurse wheeled Mia out to the hospital entrance where Evan's truck waited. Mia insisted on walking the last few steps herself, her legs steady despite weeks of bed rest and major surgery. They drove home through Nashville streets that felt both familiar and strange. Everything looked different somehow, sharper and more vivid than Evan remembered. Or maybe he was different, changed by everything that had happened. Their apartment was exactly as he'd left it, small and shabby, with furniture that had seen better days and walls that needed painting. But it was clean and safe, and Mia's room was waiting for her, decorated with the princess bedspread Sarah had bought years ago. "Can I sleep in my own bed tonight?" Mia asked. "Not a hospital bed, my actual bed." "You can sleep in your own bed every night from now on." That first night home, Evan made spaghetti, one of the few meals he could cook reliably, and they ate at their tiny kitchen table, talking about normal things like what books Mia wanted to read and whether they should get a pet once she was fully recovered. It was extraordinarily ordinary, and Evan had never been so grateful for ordinary in his entire life. After dinner, he tucked Mia into her bed and sat beside her like he'd done thousands of times before. She was already half asleep, exhausted from the excitement of coming home. "Daddy?" she murmured. "What happens now?" "Now we live. We do all the things we couldn't do before. We make plans for the future without being scared." "And you'll keep singing?" "I'll keep singing." "Good." Her eyes closed. "Mom would want you to keep singing." After Mia fell asleep, Evan went to his own room. The room he'd shared with Sarah, the room where he'd spent so many sleepless nights worrying about Mia and money and impossible choices. He pulled out his old guitar from the closet, the one he hadn't touched since Sarah's funeral. The strings needed replacing and the body had some scratches, but it was still functional. He tuned it slowly, his fingers remembering the patterns even after years of neglect. Then he started to play, quietly, so as not to wake Mia, working through songs he'd written years ago and never recorded. Some were about love and loss. Others were about hope and survival. All of them were true in ways that his younger self couldn't have understood, but that made perfect sense now. The next morning, David called with news that the settlement funds had been fully distributed. The $5 million in damages had been deposited into an account in Evan's name, minus legal fees and taxes. It was more money than Evan had ever imagined having, enough to secure Mia's future and his own. "What are you going to do with it?" David asked. Evan had been thinking about that question for days. "I'm going to invest most of it for Mia's future, college, medical costs if she needs them, whatever she wants to do with her life. But I'm also going to use some of it to start a fund for other families, something like what Harper promised, but actually functional. Small grants to help cover the gap between what insurance pays and what medical care actually costs." "That's exactly what Sarah would want you to do." "I know." 2 months after coming home from the hospital, Evan received an email from an independent record label based in East Nashville. They'd seen his story, heard him sing on the viral videos from the gala, and wanted to know if he'd be interested in recording an album. Not a mainstream pop album designed for radio play, but something authentic, songs about real life, real struggle, real hope. "We know you've been away from music for a long time," the email read, "but we think your voice and your story deserve to be heard. If you're interested in making music on your terms, we'd love to talk." Evan showed the email to Mia, who was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Actual homework from an actual school she'd been able to start attending now that her health was stable. "Are you going to do it?" she asked. "I don't know. What do you think?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happy. You spent a long time making sure I could be happy. Now it's your turn." So Evan took the meeting. The label was small and scrappy, operating out of a converted warehouse with a staff of 5, and an artist roster of musicians who cared more about integrity than commercial success. They offered him a modest contract with creative control and no pressure to chase hits or compromise his vision. "We want to help you tell your story through music," the label founder said. "Not exploit it, not package it for mass consumption. Just help you share it with people who need to hear it." Evan signed the contract 3 weeks later. Recording began in January, 6 months after the gala that had changed everything. The album took shape slowly. 11 songs about loss and love and fighting for what matters and finding your voice when systems try to silence you. Evan wrote most of the songs himself, working late at night after Mia went to sleep, pouring everything he'd learned and felt and survived into melodies and lyrics. The label wanted to include a recording of "Hold On," the song that had started everything. But instead of copying Harper's version, they stripped it down to just Evan's voice and acoustic guitar, letting the raw emotion carry the performance. At the end of the track, Melissa Torres added harmony vocals, her name prominently listed in the credits this time, her contribution acknowledged and celebrated. When the album was finished, the label scheduled a small release show at the Bluebird Cafe, the intimate venue where countless Nashville careers had begun. Tickets sold out in hours. Not because Evan was famous, but because his story had resonated with so many people who'd felt powerless against systems designed to keep them quiet. The night of the show, Evan stood backstage feeling the same nervous energy he'd felt years ago before his first televised performance. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't performing to impress judges or win competitions. He was singing because he had something to say, and people wanted to hear it. Mia sat in the front row, healthy and whole, her smile bright enough to light the entire room. Beside her were David and Jenny, Marcus Chen and Melissa Torres, Dr. Reeves and Dr. Chen, Angela Price, and dozens of other people who'd been part of their journey. The crowd was small, maybe 100 people crammed into the tiny venue, but they were present in a way that audiences at massive concerts often weren't. Evan walked onto the stage with his guitar, and no elaborate production, no backup band, no tricks or enhancements, just him and the truth of his voice. "Thank you all for being here," he said into the microphone. 9 months ago, I was working as a janitor at the Ryman Auditorium, trying to figure out how to pay for my daughter's heart surgery. I wasn't thinking about making music or speaking truth to power or any of the things that ended up happening. I was just trying to survive. But sometimes survival requires speaking up, even when you're terrified of the consequences. So that's what I did. And everything that happened after, the good and the bad and the impossible, it all started with refusing to stay quiet. He started playing, and the crowd fell silent. The songs poured out one after another, each one telling part of the story. Songs about Sarah and grief that never completely heals. Songs about Mia and the love that makes impossible things possible. Songs about standing up to power and discovering that ordinary people have more strength than they realize. When he performed "Hold On," the entire audience sang along on the chorus. Not Harper's version that they'd heard on the radio for years, but this new version that acknowledged the collaboration and credited everyone who'd contributed to its creation. Melissa stood up and joined him for the final chorus, their voices blending in harmony that was more beautiful for being honest about its collaborative nature. The show ended after an hour, with Evan's voice tired but satisfied. The applause was thunderous for such a small space, and people stood without being asked, showing appreciation not just for the music, but for everything it represented. After the show, people lined up to thank Evan personally. Some shared their own stories of fighting medical systems or speaking up against workplace injustice or finding courage in unexpected moments. Others simply wanted to shake his hand and tell him that his refusal to stay quiet had inspired them to find their own voices. One woman approached with tears in her eyes. "My daughter has the same heart condition as Mia. We couldn't afford the surgery, and our insurance keeps denying coverage. I saw your story, and I started fighting back instead of just accepting their decisions. Last week, they finally approved it. She has her surgery next month. Thank you for showing me that fighting was possible." Evan felt his own tears rising. "Thank you for telling me. That's what all of this was supposed to be about, making it possible for other families." When the venue finally emptied, Evan found Mia waiting by the stage, her energy flagging but her smile persistent. He picked her up. She was getting big for that, but he did it anyway, and carried her toward the exit. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she said, her head resting on his shoulder. "You sounded like you did before when Mom was here. Happy." "I am happy. For the first time in a long time, I'm actually happy." The album released 2 weeks later to critical acclaim and modest commercial success. It didn't hit the top of the charts or win mainstream awards, but it found its audience, people who valued authenticity over production, truth over artifice, courage over comfort. The album sold steadily for months, generating enough income that Evan could quit his warehouse job and focus on music and being present for Mia. 6 months after the album release, Evan established the Sarah Brooks Memorial Fund with $2 million from his settlement. The fund provided grants to families facing medical costs for pediatric cardiac care, with a simple application process and no exploitation of the children's stories for publicity. The board consisted of doctors, social workers, and parents who'd navigated the system themselves. There were no executive salaries, no administrative bloat, just direct help for families who needed it. The fund helped 37 families in its first year. Evan visited several of them, meeting parents who reminded him of himself a year ago, exhausted, terrified, doing impossible math to try to save their children's lives. Some of them recognized him from the news. Others had no idea who he was and didn't care. They were just grateful for help. "This is what Harper's Foundation should have been," David said during a meeting to review the fund's first-year finances. "This is what charity looks like when it's actually about helping people instead of building someone's reputation." A year and a half after the surgery, Mia's cardiologist pronounced her fully recovered. Her heart function was normal, her activity level unrestricted, her prognosis excellent. She could run without getting tired, climb stairs without gasping, play with friends without needing to rest every few minutes. She was, in every meaningful way, a healthy child. "I want you to live like she's healthy," Dr. Chen told Evan during the final follow-up appointment. "No more wrapping her in cotton wool or treating her like she's fragile. She survived something huge, and now she gets to live without limits." So they lived without limits. Evan enrolled Mia in dance classes she'd always wanted to try, but had been too sick to attend. They took a vacation to the mountains, their first real vacation in years, and hiked trails that would have been impossible before. They made plans that extended years into the future, no longer afraid that the future might not come. Evan continued making music, releasing a second album 2 years after the first. This one was different, less about struggle and survival, more about hope and rebuilding and the quiet joy of ordinary days. It sold better than the first, earning recognition from critics who praised his ability to find profound beauty in everyday moments. The Nashville music community embraced him, not as a controversy or a viral sensation, but as a legitimate artist with something meaningful to contribute. He collaborated with other musicians, performed at festivals and benefit concerts, and mentored younger artists trying to navigate an industry that still valued image over integrity. Harper Weston, meanwhile, faded from public view. Her music was pulled from streaming platforms after she admitted to the fraud. Her tour was canceled. Her endorsement deals evaporated. The last Evan heard, she'd moved to Montana and was working at a nonprofit that had nothing to do with music or celebrity. Some people said she had gotten what she deserved. Others felt the punishment exceeded the crime. Evan tried not to think about it too much. He'd told the truth about what Harper had done, and the consequences that followed were hers to carry. 3 years after that night at the Ryman Auditorium, Evan received an invitation to perform at a benefit concert for pediatric cardiac research. The venue was the Ryman itself, the same stage where everything had started. He accepted the invitation without hesitation, bringing Mia with him to rehearsals so she could see the space that had changed their lives. "This is where it happened?" Mia asked, looking around the historic auditorium with wide eyes. She was 12 now, tall and healthy, and full of the kind of energy that came from a heart that worked the way it was supposed to work. "This is where I decided to stop being invisible," Evan replied. "This is where I decided your life mattered more than my fear." The benefit concert raised $500,000 for cardiac research. Evan performed 3 songs, including a new one he'd written specifically for the event, a song about ordinary courage and the difference one voice could make when it refused to stay silent. The audience gave him a standing ovation, but what mattered more to Evan was seeing Mia in the front row, healthy and proud and alive. After the concert, as they walked through the empty Ryman corridors toward the exit, Mia took his hand. "Daddy, do you ever wish things had been different? That you didn't have to fight so hard?" Evan thought about the question. "Sometimes. But if things had been different, I wouldn't have learned what I'm capable of. I wouldn't have learned that speaking up matters, that ordinary people can hold powerful ones accountable, that truth is stronger than money." He squeezed her hand. "And you wouldn't have learned those things either. You're growing up knowing that your father had the courage to fight for what was right, even when it was terrifying. That's worth something." "It's worth everything," Mia said quietly. They walked out into the Nashville night, the city lights glowing against the sky. And Evan thought about how far they'd come from that night 3 years ago when desperation had pushed him onto a stage he had no business being on. He'd lost so much. Sarah, his privacy, his anonymity, his illusions about how the world worked. But he'd gained something too. He'd gained his voice back. He'd gained proof that integrity mattered. He'd gained the knowledge that sometimes when you refuse to stay silent, the world listens. And most importantly, he'd gained years with his daughter that they might not have had if he'd chosen safety over truth. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. 5 years after the surgery, Evan was invited to speak at a medical conference about patient advocacy and the importance of systemic transparency. He stood at a podium in front of hundreds of doctors and administrators, and he told them about being invisible, about using Mia's face without permission, about foundations that raised millions while distributing thousands, about the moment he'd decided that silence was more dangerous than speaking up. "I'm not telling you this to criticize anyone in this room," Evan said to the assembled crowd. "I'm telling you this because systems don't change unless the people inside them decide to change them. Every time you see a patient struggling with costs you know are inflated, every time you see a charity that spends more on marketing than care, every time you see someone being exploited for publicity, you have a choice. You can stay silent because it's easier and safer, or you can speak up because it's right." The speech was recorded and shared widely, becoming required viewing in several medical schools and hospital administration programs. Evan received letters from doctors and nurses who said his story had inspired them to advocate more aggressively for their patients, to question policies that prioritize profit over care, to remember why they'd entered medicine in the first place. "You started a movement," Angela told him during one of their periodic check-ins. She still represented him, though his needs for a publicist had diminished as the media attention faded into something more sustainable. "I didn't start anything," Evan replied. "I just stopped pretending I didn't see what was wrong. Other people did the rest." But that wasn't entirely true, and he knew it. By speaking up when silence would have been easier, by fighting when surrender would have saved him pain, by choosing truth when lies would have been more comfortable, he'd shown other people that resistance was possible, that ordinary voices mattered, that the emperor really was naked and someone just needed to be willing to say so. Mia graduated from middle school at the top of her class, healthy and thriving and dreaming about becoming a doctor herself someday. At her graduation ceremony, they asked her to give a speech representing her class. She stood at the microphone, no longer the frightened 9-year-old in a hospital bed, but a confident young woman who'd survived something terrible and come out stronger. 5 years ago, I was dying, Mia told the assembled students and parents. My heart was failing, and we couldn't afford the surgery to fix it. The system that was supposed to help us didn't. People who were supposed to use their power to make things better used it to make themselves look good instead. And then my dad did something that changed everything. He refused to stay quiet. He told the truth, even though it was scary and risky and could have cost us everything. And because he spoke up, I'm standing here today, alive, healthy, with a future that wouldn't have been possible if he'd chosen silence. She paused, looking directly at Evan in the audience. I learned from watching my dad that speaking up matters, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide the truth is more important than comfort, that courage isn't about not being scared, it's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. So whatever you do with your lives after you leave here today, remember that. Remember that your voice matters. Remember that staying silent when you see something wrong makes you part of the problem. Remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to pretend you don't see what's right in front of you. The auditorium erupted in applause. Evan sat with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by pride and love and gratitude that they'd made it to this moment. Sarah would have been so proud. Not just of Mia's health or her academic success, but of the person she was becoming, someone who understood that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant living with integrity. After the ceremony, families gathered outside for photos and celebrations. Evan stood with Mia while David took pictures, the two of them smiling in the June sunlight, the future stretching out before them bright and unlimited. "What do you want to do to celebrate?" Evan asked Mia. "Can we go to the Ryman? I want to stand on the stage where everything started. I want to see where you found your voice again." So they drove to the Ryman Auditorium, and through connections Evan had maintained over the years, they were allowed backstage when the building was closed to the public. They stood together on the stage where Evan had confronted Harper, where Melissa had testified, where truth had finally broken through years of carefully constructed lies. "Sing something," Mia said, "just for me, like you used to when I was little and couldn't sleep." So Evan sang. His voice echoed through the empty auditorium, filling the historic space with a song about love and loss and fighting for what matters and the unbreakable bond between fathers and daughters. Mia listened with her eyes closed, and when the song ended, she opened them with tears on her cheeks. "That was beautiful, Daddy. You're what's beautiful, sweetheart. You and the life we get to live together. Everything I fought for, everything I risked, it was all for this. For you standing here healthy and strong and ready to change the world." They left the Ryman as the sun was setting, painting the Nashville sky in shades of gold and crimson. Evan drove home through familiar streets, his daughter beside him, their future secure, their past transformed from tragedy into testimony. He thought about Harper sometimes, wondering if she'd found peace in her new anonymous life. He thought about all the families the Sarah Brooks Memorial Fund had helped, the children who were alive because someone had been willing to tell the truth about how badly the system was broken. He thought about the music he'd made and the songs he still wanted to write. He thought about Sarah and how she'd taught him that integrity mattered more than comfort. But mostly, he thought about the moment he'd decided to stop being invisible, the moment he'd chosen truth over safety, courage over fear, speaking up over staying silent. That decision had cost him everything, his jobs, his privacy, his peace, and it had given him everything too, his voice, his daughter's life. Proof that ordinary people could change systems that seemed unchangeable. Years later, when journalists asked Evan what he wanted his legacy to be, he always gave the same answer. "I want people to remember that one voice can matter, that speaking truth to power isn't just for the extraordinary, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to stay quiet. When staying quiet would let injustice continue. I was just a janitor who got tired of watching powerful people exploit the vulnerable. But being ordinary didn't mean I had to be silent, and neither does anyone else." The Sarah Brooks Memorial Fund continued to grow, eventually helping hundreds of families navigate the impossible intersection of medical necessity and financial reality. Marcus Chen became a vocal advocate for properly crediting session musicians and vocalists, working to change industry practices that had exploited artists for decades. Melissa Torres released her own album, finally receiving recognition for the talent that had been hidden behind Harper's name for so long. And in a small apartment in Nashville, a father and daughter lived their ordinary, extraordinary life, going to school and work, making music and memories, planning futures, and honoring the past. They lived with the knowledge that they'd survived something terrible and come through it not just intact but stronger. They lived with gratitude for every ordinary day, every healthy heartbeat, every moment they'd been given that they might not have had if fear had won. Because Evan Brooks had learned something that night at the Ryman Auditorium, something he carried with him every day. When ordinary people refuse to stay silent, when they speak truth regardless of consequences, when they choose integrity over safety, systems change. Not easily, not quickly, but inevitably. And sometimes that's all it takes to transform the world. Not a hero or a savior or someone extraordinary. Just one person who decides that some truths are too important to leave unspoken, even when speaking costs everything, especially then.